Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and a huge welcome to Produce, Mix, Fix, and Conquer. My name is Rich Steve Beck. I'm the founder of our awesome community, which I've been chatting to our guest about off camera a minute ago, which is crazy when we reflect on it, which has grown from 3 members all the way up to 2,800 members on Facebook. So if you go to facebook.com/groups/produce, mix, fix, and conquer, feel free to join our community. Also, if you go to youtube.com/produce, mix, fix, and conquer, you'll find well over 30 interviews on there, 50 hours worth of content talking about engineers, amazing years of experience, crazy stories, and also fantastic audio education as well. So if you want to support our community, feel free to do so. So you can go to www.buymeacoffee.com/PMFC together. So that's buymeacoffee.com/PMFC together. So our next guest is, which a lot of people have been getting super excited about, which is Mr. Bob St. John. So Bob has had an absolutely fantastic career over many, many decades. So he's Grammy winning, also Billboard Latino and Dove Award winning. Bob St. John, so he's worked with legendary bands such as Duran Duran, Extreme, Collective, Soul and Hootie, and Blowfish as well. His record sales as well, with all these amazing bands that he's worked with over the years, exceeds well over 50 million. So we're really super excited to have Bob join us. And let's join the man himself online. So, hey, Bob.
How are you, Rich?
Really,
Hi,
really
Jeff, Phil, Bob, Javier. Good to see you guys here.
Amazing, fantastic. And everyone, hey Jeff, hey Phil, hey Bob, hey Javier as well. So everyone feel free to send messages through to Bob and myself as we're having a conversation exploring Bob's history. But Bob, let's, like the rest of our guests that we've had the honor of chatting with over the last few months, let's have a chat about where you started right at the beginning. So as a kid, what type of music were you getting into? Did your parents have any influence on your music taste at the very beginning?
I come from a family of musicians, and although I play keyboards, I don't really consider myself a musician. I play in stuff more frequently now just out of necessity or because it's just faster. But I didn't really want to do that, although, you know, I did, and I still have an affinity for drums. And the funny thing about that is, you know, I probably would have wanted to be a drummer, but all they gave me was a practice pad. And, you know, when you're 7 years old, you want to make noise. The polar opposite, I'm sure, of what my parents wanted. And it was no fun. My uncle taught me drum lessons, and my grandfather taught pretty much everybody in the town where I live how to play guitar. And guitar never interested me. I only learned to play a few chords in guitar when I was showing my daughter how to do it. And that was about like 5 years ago. It's embarrassing. So the thing was, though, I was fascinated with records. My mother told me she had all of these 45s that she had collected from her, you know, from her teenage years. And I was fascinated with them. I used to run a needle down them to see if I could make sound come out of them. And I spent all of my time with a record player. And I knew very early on, I'm going to say seven or eight, I wanted to work with music and knobs, electronics, and this magical disc thing that music came out of. And in our house, my mother was always playing music. It was always on. If the TV wasn't on, music was on. So I grew up listening to the music she grew up listening to, which is the 50s and the 60s and Broadway musicals, oddly enough. That stuff was always playing in the house. So that was my earliest influence. When I was in high school, a shop teacher said to me, I said to a shop teacher, he says, "What do you want to do?" It was electronics. And he said, I told him I want to be a recording engineer. I had no idea how to do it because at that point I was super introvert. I wasn't going to walk up to a studio and ask for an internship at where I lived. There really weren't any studios to do that with anyhow. And he said to me with his Russian accent, "Robert, you don't want to be the recording engineer. You want to fix TV set." So I started fixing TV sets. I got a few shocks, then thought maybe music would be a better. So from there, I still wanted to do it. I recorded everything I could get my hands on. I would buy like little open reel recorders that looked like they came out of Mission Impossible. I would repair them because I have an aptitude with fixing things or taking them apart. And I started recording anything I could find, sounds from outside, cars going by. I was just fascinated with the whole concept of recording. I still didn't know, because there's no direction. Back then, I mean, everybody now has it so lucky because you can get a computer and you're a recording engineer, number one. You can just start. Or, there's plenty of schools, Full Sail, and colleges and places that teach this, community colleges that teach this. Back then, there was nothing. And I had no idea how to go about it. I just knew it was what I wanted to do. But again, because I was kind of an introvert, I, didn't tell anybody. I mean, when I bought my first 45, which was the song in the year 2525 by Zager and Evans, I didn't even want anybody to know what record I bought. So I had one of those really gross plastic earphones. I had a little Parrot, record player. And I would sit there with my little earphone listening to it. It sounded like it was about like a half an inch tall. And that was how I started with music. From there, I wanted to be near knobs and electronics. I didn't know how to do that. So I went to work at the local radio station. And I was a DJ there for years. And I figured, well, I guess this is going to be my career. I love the sound of my voice. So I was all set. Here I was with music and knobs. This was good enough for me. But, music, just like playing an instrument, just like playing sports, any of those disciplines, if you let it get away from you, it calls back to you. It keeps pulling you back in. I'm like, I got to do this somehow. When I was in high school, I had built a pirate radio station in my closet. And I had modified a Radio Shack, like it was a little FM transmitter that you would have normally used for eavesdropping on people. And I made it, so it could accept a line input, and I boosted the output, and I built all this stuff from plans at Radio Shack and on 9-volt batteries. And everything was in cigar boxes at that time because I had no skills drilling anything. Maybe I took the wrong shop classes. I don't know. So I had this pirate radio station set up in my bedroom, and if you were around the neighborhood, you could pick it up. And, I remember then because I still had a Boston accent then. I don't have it anymore now. If I go home to Boston in the fall, it comes back. All I need is like a couple days up there, and pretty soon I'm saying I got to pack the car in the drawer, and I need 2 or 3 of those. But it's like, it was when I started to work at the radio station, I knew I still wanted to work with music. When I was in high school, I was sitting, these 2 kids were sitting next to me. One of them was this guy would show up to class 10 minutes late all the time. He was a long-haired kind of kid, always smelled like weed. He'd get in class, he'd throw his coat over his head. Well, I knew he was in a band because I heard the guy in front of him, 2 very good friends, Adam Ferrecchia, Jose Enes, and they were always talking about bands. Jose was Portuguese and Canadian, which makes him twice as stubborn, okay? And every band from Canada was great. Rush was great. Triumph was great. He just kept going down the list. Anything from Canada had to be great. But I knew he was in a band, and I had 2 microphones. And what was an absolute leap of faith for me, and way outside of my shell, so I said, I got some microphones. I can record your band. I had no idea I could, but I wanted to. He's like, really? All right, you come down to rehearsal and you record us. And then I got home like, oh shit, I've only got 2 inputs. So I built some more of these really nasty little preamps I got out of Radio Shack plans. And you go buy the parts, and I made a 4-channel mic preamp. And I had an open reel machine and a cassette machine. And I just bounced it back and forth between the 2 of them. That was my first recording. And once I did that once, then I was totally hooked. Even though I thought I was going to go to college for communications, and I did. But after 3 years, I knew there was just one thing I wanted to do, and this is it. I think when you have a fire in you to do something, that's what happens. I read your post, and you were talking about, and you took the leap, and you said, I've now put out Shingle as a mastering studio. Here I am. You know what it feels like? It feels even better once you start to make money from it. But the thing is, it's like, I couldn't picture myself having spent my life in broadcasting as much as I loved it, because this is what I wanted to do. And I always would have been looking at music like, longingly like the one that got away,
Absolutely. Can't agree more. So for me as well, I was in the banking world for a long period of time as well. So to actually be able to do this music thing, just to see if it even works as a mastering engineer, just right at the very beginnings, I've been doing that for like 10 years plus, like mastering. But however, now it's like, now is the time to do it and build a studio and just take it from there. But it's crazy. But if you can do what you love for the rest of your life, and do you ever have to retire, Bob? To be fair, or do you just keep going until you die? You know,
I would retire. I don't understand that concept.
Yeah,
I've never thought of that because, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I've been on sabbatical from my day job since 1986.
Yeah.
I remember the day I walked out and just didn't look back. You know, didn't know how I was going to support myself. I was already working in studios. I was already working with bands. I had a way to support myself, but still to go from a regular paycheck to that's kind of crazy. Kind of crazy.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for that. So tell us as well. So what was your first experience like recording your first ever band? So tell us more about that, and maybe tell us about some of the bands that started to work with and how things started to snowball for you working with some of the famous bands that we know you for.
Now, there's a funny thing inside of the first time I recorded, because again, I went up to that rehearsal space. I was a good boy. I never drank. I don't even think I actually drank until I was married. Back in like,
wow.
Yeah, I never drank, didn't smoke pot, didn't do coke, nothing.
Yeah.
And I was walking into this teenage den of inequity. It was in this really dilapidated old building. And as I coming up the stairs, I had all my stuff in milk crates that I had stolen. You know, I had no money for this crap. And I went up there and I'm like, where's Jose? And Jose is a very important person in the story of my career, as you'll hear. You know, like, where is he? And it's just like rock music blasting. It smelled like beer, weed, cigarettes, and like, you know, some band down the hall playing Zeppelin. And it was just, you know what it's like in a rehearsal space? But this was just a building somebody had sublet to a bunch of bands. And I'm like, I says, hey. I says, is Jose there? Where is he? And he's like sucking face with some girl up against a mattress that had been pushed up against the wall. And I'm like, he's like, Saint. People who've known me forever call me Saint. I'm like, yeah. So I set up and I recorded. It was stressful to me. I remember I had the worst pounding headache of my life. And, but afterwards I listened to the recording, and, you know, there's that thing when you do this, when it hooks you, that's the excitement. I was like, listen to this. I did this. You created something with your own hands of sorts, your ears. And from there I was hooked. I started doing sound for live bands, mainly so I could get experience operating a console. You know, I didn't have a clue of what I was doing, but that was how I learned. Because at that time, again, there was nowhere to learn that sort of stuff, you know. So I was just fumbling around in the dark with it, but I managed, you know.
Amazing. Well, what console did you start off on originally to begin with when you were recording? What happened was I got some friends of mine, actually Jose's brother Tiago and this guy Steve Kowalczyk, is still a very good friend of mine. You know, they helped me buy my first multi-track machine. I had saved money all summer. I'd saved like $1,600, but I needed another $1,600. The machine was $3,200. It was a Tascam 8-track with DVX noise reduction. And my mother kicked in some money, and I bought that machine, and that actually changed my entire existence. Because now, look, 8 tracks. Before that, I was manually syncing 2 machines together by rubbing the flange to keep it somewhat in time. It's cuckoo stuff. Because, again, you guys got it easy. Just plug in a computer. You know, the question is, well, you know, can I get myself like a Chandler compressor or like a mic pre? With me, it's like, whatever, Radio Shack, 9-volt batteries. If I run on a 9-volt batteries, the session's over. So, hope it's not past the time the store closes. So I had the 8-track, and I had a Tapco 6-channel. I think it's a 6000R. It's a 6-channel console that sits in a rack mount with rotary pots on it and 2 returns. So technically I had 8 channels. And starting an 8-track, that's how I taught myself to do bounces, where you had your drums, then you bounce them to 2 tracks. And this was just how you made layers of stuff in 8-track. Once you start doing that, and once you start taking home that cassette and listening to it in the car, it really starts to take some have real gravity to you. And it's like a snowball running downhill. Then you can't get enough of it. And the thing is, as with all things with music, you should be doing other things like studying college, doing work, and, you know, conducting your life. But pretty soon
it consumes all of you, everything. And it totally consumed me. And, you know, then I was supposed to be in college. I'd be skipping classes so I could get together with some friends of mine and record. And because I wanted to learn and I wanted to create. At the end of the Sound City movie, you've seen it, yes?
Oh, yeah. Dave Grohl directed it, didn't he?
Something at the very end of it, where Neil Young, you just hear him talking, and he says it in rapid fire. I can't remember the exact, so I'm going to screw it up. But he said, you're going to go in the studio, and you're going to make a recording, and then you're going to take a take home, and you're going to listen to it over and over and over again. And you're going to show it to your friends, and you're going to listen to it all the way home. Well, that's what we all did. You know, that's exactly it. And it's like, you know, now most of our friends, I'm sure most of your friends are musicians or creative people to some way. And it's like, hey, check this out. Well, I'm 58 and I'm still that way. You know, I'm still like, you know, we joke about, well, did you listen to it in the car? And I posted some picture of me scowling when I came out of the car. I was truly pissed off. I wasn't acting, but you know, that's because I'm trying to finish a job to give it to a client. But for me, I expect great things from myself, you know. And if I can't pull it off, then I get to be in a pretty foul mood. So once I made that first recording, and I still have it, I'm like, oh, now I see. Remember, I had no effects units. I had to build an effects unit out of 2 spring reverbs I hacked out of guitar amps. Everything I had to make because I didn't have any money for this stuff. I don't remember where I stole that console, but I definitely stole it. From there, I, you know, got some money. My father helped me get a loan, and I opened a studio, which I had for about a year. And that 8-track I used in there a lot. That 8-track, and you know, got a lot of use. And I had a ramps up 12-channel console, and that was when I really started to learn. You know, everything was manual. There's, you know, automation, that stuff. There's just some sort of wet dream you read about in Mix magazine. You know?
Oh, crazy. I remember my dad. So my dad was a musician. My granddad was, and my grand was. And my dad, I remember him having a 4-track cassette deck, and he would just like multi-track himself on this cassette, like over and over and over again. And then I showed my dad Pro Tools, and he went, "That's cheating," and just walked off. You know,
well, can I answer a few things? Because I see here that, you know, Jesse Gonzalez, who said hello, Bob. Jesse is the second person I ever recorded. And he's one of the people I recorded on 8-track. Jesse and I are still doing recordings together. He's from Puerto Rico originally, but grew up in the town where I was. And people in Puerto Rico would barely know who I was before 1999 or so, if it wasn't for Jesse, because I did so many songs with it. It's Christian music in Spanish.
Cool.
And Jeff, that was a Tascam. It was a Tascam 80-8 with DBX noise reduction. The thing was this big. It weighed 60 pounds, and I dragged it around in my Pinto. I'm not kidding.
Amazing. That's so cool.
Bob Pescarella, it was the transition from tape to digital wasn't hard for me. I just embraced it. I had no choice. But, you know, I started to look around back in like, it was 90s, 97, 98, and I was going to sessions, and I was noticing this new power structure where you had a producer, an engineer, Pro Tools operator, and an assistant. And after watching that for about a year, I started to realize that pretty soon it was going to be producer, Pro Tools operator, and assistant. Engineering's not that impossible, you know? No. And so I learned how to do Pro Tools by doing tuning and auto-tune. This isn't like Pro Tools 5. It was hell because you can only tune like 100 seconds at a time, and it was prone to crashing. And when it crashed, you would have to go back and do that same 100 seconds. If you forgot to save it, it's so tedious. That was the only part that was bumpy for me. I don't miss analog at all. Nope. I hate to be unromantic about it, but it's over.
It is what it is. Absolutely. And the thing is, it's really interesting. We, you know, talking to lots of engineers over the last few months, and it's really interesting that I've seen. I don't know. We'll have a chat maybe about your workflow in a bit, Bob, if that's cool. But so some of the engineers I've had a chat with, you know, with like, for example, David Kalmusky's got a crazy amount of like rack mount gear behind him. And then he's like, oh, but I'm hybrid, you know, I merge the two things. Or I speak to some engineers that go, I use all the rack mount stuff to record, you know, with all the amazing pre's and, you know, kind of compression and EQs and all that sort of stuff. But then in the box for mixing and in the box for mastering as well. So it's quite interesting, like how
Honestly,
people
I would
embrace
describe myself as hybrid, but the thing is, in the past like year and a half, I just got rid of so much stuff because
Yeah.
I just wasn't using it enough. So for me, I've got, you know, a collection of preamps. I've got the Millennia, I've got the John Hardy, I got a bunch of these Behringer with the Midas pre's that I just love, and the outboard, the Lexicon 224X reverbs, which are my favorite toys. But those are even making less and less of an appearance in my mixes for whatever reason. You know, the UAD's plugin of the 224 is pretty close. It's not like the 224X, which has that magical vintage dust for it. It is literally dusty too. But it's but you know, for people like David, where you know he's been collecting that stuff his whole life. I had a lot of gear, and then when I got divorced, my wife made me sell it all. So it took me a while to start reamassing stuff. And the thing is, so I had like the drummer, I had the SSL compressor, I had all of this stuff, and I started to look at it. And as the UAD stuff came out, and I am an absolute purist, I'd love to say, oh, no, I've got to have my DBX 160s. No, once I started using UAD's version, and I had the genuine article there, what I noticed was the general article made noise and was feisty. Meaning, you know, it sounded really cool at like 10 a.m. and at like 1 p.m. it sounded weird, you know, and that's something we don't get with plugins. Stuff works the same way all the time. And the other thing is too, with the declining amounts of budgets in the business, we don't have the time for 7 pages of recalls, and clients are totally used to, you know, hey, in the second verse, I need to change one word. You know, in the days of analog, that was just some weird dream that was only relegated to the, you know, to the best of the best who could afford it.
Yeah, that's amazing. So brilliant. Thanks so much for that. That's brilliant, Bob. Maybe let's have a chat about some of the bands that you've worked with and some of the crazy stories as well. So I know you've just touched on the very beginning, like when he was talking about your friends and how it all began right at the very start, and the fact that you're still working with him today. That is absolutely awesome. I love that. Absolutely love that. So let's have a chat. You know, you mentioned it yourself. You know, let's have a chat maybe about Extreme. So tell us about some of the Extreme albums that you worked on and some of the stories. You know,
to connect the dots with Extreme. Jose was the kid who sat next to me in American Government. He had a band. He had several bands, and then one day he says, I got this new kid. He says he's just a kid, but he's really good. He says, you know, he's from Hudson. I says, really? Oh yeah, you got to hear this guy, because back then it was heavy metal, pop metal. Everything was about better, faster, louder. Yeah. And you know, he introduced me to this 16-year-old Portuguese kid named Nuno Betancourt, and that's how far back that connection goes. And it's when you and I were talking offline before this. It's the thing that's most important in this business that we're missing out now a lot is staying connected with people. You know. Yeah, we see each other on Facebook. We may chat here and there, but it's nothing like being with somebody. And that was already fading away before COVID and all this other stuff caused it to be a problem. So I met Nuno through Jose, and he was pretty damn amazing. And he was with that band when he got approached by the guys in the band Extreme. And originally, Extreme wanted to have 2 guitar players. And Nuno was like, you don't need 2 guitar players. And with Nuno, you really don't need 2 guitar players. And he convinced them to go with 1. And I was still working with Sinful, which was Jose's band, when he started working with Extreme. And I think we were working on the same projects at the same time, because Nuno promised he'd finish the thing, even though he's leaving the band. It was a big dramatic scene. But even though he's leaving the band, he promised he'd finish it. We went from that to working with Extreme. That goes back to like 86 or 87, I think, when I first started working with them. I was still working my day job then. I think it was 86. So I was definitely still working my day job, because I remember picking him up at his house on my way from my day job. My day job was working at this company. It was a military subcontractor making these microwave oscillators that were part of a missile guidance system. Wow. War toy. I made war toys. Okay. So, and I would pick him up, and he'd get in my car, and he'd go, oh, yeah, I'm so hungry. He's always starving. So I would take him for Burger King, and then he would come and just burn through guitar tracks all night. And we would be there till like 2 or 3 in the morning. I'd drop him off at his house. I'd go home and sleep 2 hours. Then I'd drive to work. I had to be there at 7 o'clock, you know. it was around the time that I worked at that studio that I met this guy. He was a huge mentor to me, which is Phil Green. He owned this studio called Normandy Sound. Phil was the first real engineer I met, meaning that he had credits. I saw articles on him. Then it was recording engineer producer, or DB Magazine. Recording engineer producer. He recorded Billy Cobham and then Steve Smith's from Journey's Fusion project. And this guy is like out there, man. He's just wild hair. He's got a really gravelly voice. And it was the first time I ever got inside the insanity of the music business. And honestly, I was still an innocent then, you know. And I'm like watching these guys, and they're like lining up the 24 track and an MCI where that front plate comes down, and they're like all doing lines off of it. And I'm like, this is just too far out, man. And I wondered why these people stayed up like, 30 hours at a time. Well, he just mentored me, just started talking to me. And it was the first time I met somebody like that completely changed my existence. It's one of the 3 mentors I've had in my life. It totally changed me, And eventually that studio merged with Normandy, and I went to work at Normandy. And that's where I actually recorded, one of Extreme's demos was down there. And then they got a management company who owned a studio, the Danners and this other woman, Yvette Collins, and they were going to manage the band. And they had a studio. The studio had an old Angus console in it. Angus being going way, way back. And it had a bunch of API EQs in it and API graphics in them. It was pretty cool. It's really shallow. It's about this deep. And we started recording demos there. And those are the demos that got them their record deal. We did 40, 50 songs before they got their deal. And that was how it went.
Wow.
Yep.
That's amazing. So, and how did the relationship with the band continue? So tell us about some of the albums that you
from there, as is always the case in the record business, the people at the record company wanted them to have a producer, which was fine. And they figured Mac would be a good producer for them because of their Queen influence. I went down and I hung out, met Mac. I realized, to me, I said to this, look, guys, I said, this guy's got this under control. Come on, Mac's a legend. Seriously, you got to look at his discography, And I said, we'll work on the next record together. And they're like, no, man, it's going to be fine. I didn't want to be a third wheel. I didn't have the experience necessary. It just wasn't there, So it was, the late 80s, and most music then, rock music was, gated reverb, big guitars, like lots of drum samples in with the drums and, ambient. And so they went ahead and recorded the record, and it was like December, and Nuno called me up, and he started talking in this weird secret squirrel voice. And I answered the phone and he's like, hey, what's up? I'm like, what are you doing? Yeah, I was going to, hey, yeah, no, man, it's fine. Hey, what's up? I says, will you please just communicate? He says, listen, I can't talk openly. I'm like, what? What happened was they didn't like what they did with Mac.
All right.
And I'm like, wow, man, I'm sorry. And I went down to hear it. It sounded peculiar, but I figured he's still got to mix it, right? And he said, Mac's going home for Christmas. We want you to come in and, do some mixes for us. I'm like, well, I don't know if I want to do that. To me, that something about that was wrong. We no longer live in a world of right or wrong, but at that time, yeah, it seemed wrong. And I said, yeah, you're going to talk to Mac about that. I says, I don't want to butt in on this. Yeah, but you don't understand. These guys would always speak like that to me. It's like, I don't understand what. So Mac went home for Christmas, and I can't remember. I think they did talk to him before he went home. And he said, he called me up, and he says, well, I understand the boys want you to do some mixes. He always talks super soft. You can never understand him. It was crazy. Half the time we'd all be looking, going, what did he say? We were all living at that house at the studio together. The band, the people who managed the band, who owned the studio, their 12-year-old daughter, Mac, me, Nuno, Pat, Paul, everybody was there all the time. In a house. It was a 300-year-old, old revolutionary era house. The studio was beautiful. I love the studio, you know. And Mac, I said to Mac, Mac says, yeah, I understand the boys want you to do some, you know, mixing. I says, yeah, you okay with that? He says, oh, yeah. He says, I'll be fine. He says, well, while I'm mixing, what are you going to do? He says, nah, I'll drink vodka. So I went in to take a stab at mixing them, but he had recorded this, like the Billy Squier Don't Say No record he had done, where it was very Zeppelin-esque, which I have probably the only surviving mixes of it. I made a cassette copy, and I heard it just recently. It's like, it's not awful, but it was not what was current then. I don't think it's aged badly, but it wasn't what was current. And so I attempted to like use my tricks. And again, if I had Pro Tools back then, I would pull that up like that, mix the whole record in 3 days. But this was analog. He recorded at 15 IPS. I hate 15 IPS for recording. And it was just weird. And I took a song and attempted to trigger samples, but the guitar sounds were so un-Nuno. And you know, I didn't want to say anything like, what the fuck were you thinking? Because it sounded wrong. And, you know, and we couldn't really get the samples to sound right because the general ambience of the kit was wrong. He had mics. It's like a Zeppelin record. Mics were 6 feet above the drums. The kick drum mic was 5 feet away on the floor. And there was like a snare mic, but it was like, you know, 3 or 4 feet away from the snare. And that's a great concept, but it wasn't going to work for this. What happened was he had done some mixes before he went home. He had them mastered and he had a reference sent to A&M. And we knew there was trouble because the people from A&M never called back. It was 2 weeks before they heard back from him.
That's crazy.
Bad. So we said, well, why don't we just try recutting the drums and maybe it'll be fine. But he wasn't really paying attention when they cut the drums. He was close enough to the click, but not for you to be recutting.
Yeah.
So we recut the drums and then the bass didn't feel right. So then we recut the bass and then the guitar didn't feel right. You got the idea, you know. We ended up redoing the whole record, and then Gary got a yeast infection in his throat.
Oh wow.
Stress related. Because he said to me, he says, I can't sing in front of Mac again. His Mac he said he was just evil to him, you know, because Gary was such a huge Freddie fan. Mac would use that to manipulate Gary when he was singing.
Right.
I don't know if I could do. He says, that's not what Freddie would do. So Gary did not want to sing. Every vocal in that record has been laid in a line at a time or slip synced in using a synchronizer or dropped in with a sampler. It was 3 months to do that. It was actually, that was one of the worst experiences I've ever had. And it was really rough. I don't listen to that record. It's just way too much emotional baggage for me.
Yeah. Absolutely fair enough. And then what about
before I go, the iconic solo and Play With Me that was in the Bill and Ted's movie.
Yeah.
That's like, you know, he starts off with that Turkish rondo thing.
Oh, yeah.
That, by the way, was the guitar sound for the whole record. That was one of the few things we kept from the original one. We were in the middle of mixing. I had become like a diva. I couldn't deal with being with Mac in the room. He was so, I'm sure it was well-intentioned by him. He probably felt he should be mixing it, but the band wanted me to mix it. And, you know, he'd listen to the mix. I say, well, what do you think? He goes, sounds a bit crispy. And then he'd just leave the room. Or basically, like, what do you think? It's okay if you like that sort of thing. Like, so the more time I spent with him, the more stressed I became. And then one afternoon, I was cleaning up tracks. He never cleaned up anything. There was like, you'd be trying to run a rough mix of it, and vocals would keep popping up because he didn't clean anything up. Like, while I was cleaning up the tracks, I erased the doubled solo to Play With Me. I'm like, oh, God, I don't want to tell Nuno this. And I woke them up early while Mac was still sleeping to announce to them that I called the whole band in the control room for a meeting. This is a nightmare scenario. We're all in the house together all the time.
Yeah.
And I said, I got to talk to you. It's like, what? I said, I can't work here with you guys, with Mac. I can't do it. I'm like, oh, wow. I says, it's either he's got to go or I've got to go, but I can't. I says, all respect to you guys. I says, I don't think I can do this. And I says, oh, and I erased the solo to Play With Me. What happens is Nuno goes like this, goes, And then he started talking to himself, and he stared at the floor for easily 5 minutes without saying a word.
Oh wow!
Everybody else got up, went back to sleep. It was like 7:30 in the morning, and I left the control room, and he was still in there talking to himself. Mac actually recorded that solo. I was making a Dolby SR harness for the 2-track when he recorded it because I didn't want to record it again. It was a hard record. It was hard to do, you know.
Sounds it. Do you reckon those sorts of scenarios, like it's obviously like back then, there was like the budgets were just crazy, though, weren't they?
Oh yeah, I mean,
had.
I was telling Kevin Figueiredo, the drummer in Extreme Now, about the good old days of the record business when they said, "Well, you got 250,000," but it was basically just a guideline. Spend whatever you want, you know. You don't go too far over budget. But you know, I think that first record that wasn't that expensive. Maybe 200,000. I know the second record wasn't that expensive either because we did most of that in Boston before we went to LA. And you know, but the third and fourth record, I can't say that. Those were like each a little over 500,000. You know, but nobody said anything to you then. You know, they just kept writing checks. Those days are gone. But it was a fun time.
It sounds incredible.
A fun time. Keep working. People keep paying you.
Absolutely. So I remember it's like my dad was a DJ in the late 70s, just at like friends' parties and stuff. But he had a whole wall just full of like 7-inch vinyls. And as a kid, I used to love just looking at all the covers. But I found all these like hair metal bands. You know, I wanted to grow a mullet. So I mean, you know, in my late 30s, I was an 80s kid. You know, so I was looking at all these guys like Europe and Bon Jovi, and then later on started like discovering kind of more bands like, you know, Megadeth, and then going down the routes of Metallica as well. And, you know, and then you look at all these crazy Motley Crue, but then you look at all these wild stories as well. You there wonder, does that happen anymore? You know, it was like the stories of like drugs and debauchery and just crazy, crazy stuff that happened. But it sounded just like a completely different time out of a film almost as well. It's just, do you think though that feeling and that with rock music, do you reckon the ferociousness of rock music and the danger of rock music, do you reckon that's gone now? Do you reckon that bands are playing it a little bit too safe, or
I think it's still there. The problem is with computers, we're spend too much time calculating things.
Yeah,
you know, looking for that perfect thing. You know, I read an article with Dave Grohl talking about how much he liked analog and that, you know, it was so much better. But the thing is, I'm not saying he's wrong, but analog workflow is what makes analog. Analog is one step closer to live, because if you just recorded a vocal and you think you want to grab that third line and the second verse again, you better really want it. Because if you go over the one you have, there are no levels of undo in analog. It's just gone. And there's also a chance if your engineer screws up that he could erase something before it or something after it, or punch in somewhere and lose something you want altogether. It's possible. So, and I've said to people, I says, you want analog? Look, Pro Tools, it has destructive record, just like old times, guys. When we were doing the Fifth Extreme album, Sadaj to Rock, I just recorded the basic tracks. Nuno did most of the rest of it himself at his house. And when we were recording, Nuno came to me with this revolutionary concept, because we recorded analog and digital. So we did digital at 88 and Pro Tools and analog 24 track.
Yeah.
And he says, hey, he says, you know, I'm just loving the way this analog sounds. I want to record the guitars like this. I said, really? Yeah. I says, you're sure you want to do that? Yeah. So their manager, Rob Hoffman, came and he says, oh, this is going to take forever. What are we going to do? I says, don't worry, we're not going to record analog. Said, what do you mean? I said, we won't be recording analog. And honestly, the cool thing on that record is you able, because we synced everything up, you can actually flip back and forth between an analog playlist and a digital playlist. The only way I could really tell the analog one was because the assistant managed to record the kick drum next to the time code track. Wow. So whenever you flip, you could hear that gentle tone playing in the background. Yeah. I liked it in the cymbals. I liked it in the bass. And as far as the guitar, we started recording guitar. We cut the band sort of live. And Nuno says, all right, listen, I want to go in here. With him, split second timing with everything. You know, can't erase even a microsecond of music. And it's like, he says, you know what you're going to do it? Yeah, I know. So he says, don't go in any earlier. And I only want to do these 8 bars here. I'm like, yeah, I got it. He says, you got it? Oh, yeah, I got it. And then the manager's sitting behind me. And he's out there playing guitar. He can't really hear, you know, in his headphones. But like I punched in a bar early and punched out a bar and a half late. He's like, wait, what are you doing? I says, that's what you said to do. What did you do? I said, just what you asked. He says, did you come in early? I'm like, I don't know, maybe. Hence, I earned the new title, Eraserhead St. John. And then after he came in, he says, yeah, I think I'm going to record this at home.
Yeah.
True story.
Oh, that's amazing. That's so cool. Oh, just while we're on the topic as well of you know, all that, the rock stuff. With Extreme, can you remember what amps you were using back then, and mics and drum kits and stuff like that?
I remember just about everything. People were always asking me that stuff about Extreme. Yeah. But to answer, Sean Odette asked if I worked on the new Extreme record. This is the only Extreme record, Sean, that I haven't worked on. I know that it exists. That's what I can tell you. I know Extreme fans have been waiting like 14 years for it, but it actually does exist. That's all I'll say, because I've only heard bits and pieces of it. People always ask that stuff, and sometimes I'm actually able to pull up recall notes, but you know, I do a lot of the same stuff, you know, so you always know where you're going with it. You know, like an Extreme 1, then it would be what I was using typically at the time. That was going to be 57s on the guitar amp.
Yeah.
You know, an Extreme 2, that was Michael Wagner was producing, and he had a setup he wanted to use on the guitar. We used a Fostex ribbon mic on the cab. Extreme 3 was 87s, and pretty much 87s is all I've been using on guitar amps for a while, if I can get them. Otherwise, a 57. You know, guitar amps are all about placement and, you know, and helping people get their sound together. Now, I'm going to say kids because I'm old. Kids, now, you're a kid. How's that sound? To make you feel better? Now, it's so much easier, and you've got so much more information. And so many more things to do. Like, you know, when I record now guitar, it's a 57 and 87 and direct in case I want to do something with it later. But, you know, it's all about how you place it. And to me, the only way to figure that out is put a pair of headphones on just so you're not going to blow what you're hearing. Sit in front of the amp, listen to the 4 speakers. Yeah. Every one of them sounds a little different. Which one sounds the sweetest? Which one sucks out loud? And, you know, if you don't know what you're doing, and I tell people this all the time, it's like, how do I record guitar? I said, one mic. Find the right place with one mic. 2 mics is not for the faint of heart. And I get a lot of stuff. People will send me like, songs to mix. I'm like, 4 mics. Every one of them's in the wrong place. Like, listen, would you give me? You were giving me a selection. Oh, I've got kitty turd, doggy turd, squirrel turd, and raccoon turd. Let's see if I can blend these together and make a hybrid shit animal. It's.
I love that. That's brilliant.
I'm not kidding. So, you know, and the thing is, and I've always have been a purist. Find a good mic and a good preamp. And, you know, we're doing like Extreme 4. We're doing that on that beautiful, it's at NRG. They have these, I think it's 2 8078s pushed together, 8068s pushed together. It's massive. It's a 64 input Neve. That thing sounds cherry. And the one we did Extreme 4 on was at Criteria. They had 8068 there. That's the most amazing console. I mean, you just plug shit in and it sounds good. And I thought when I was young, using a Ramsa 12-channel console with my, you know, the cheapest mics I could buy, that, you know, maybe there's some magical thing. And I actually feel that Neve consoles are magic. There's no other way to put that.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, completely agree. Thanks so much, Bob. That's absolutely amazing. Maybe let's have a chat about Duran Duran. So tell us about some of the songs and some of the stories.
I mean, the Duran Duran gig came about in a peculiar way. Anthony Resta was a producer that I worked with forever. We had a production company together in Boston. He had worked with Dale Bozio, was in Missing Persons, the 80s punkish rock band, and Warren Cucurullo, who was in Zappa's band and also was in Missing Persons, was still friends with Dale, and Dale sent him some tracks she was thinking of working on to Warren in London. Warren was in Duran Duran at the time, and Warren heard the tracks, and he said, "Hey, who did these?" And called up Anthony and said, he says, "These are really cool. Do you mix?" And Anthony's like, "Yeah." And Anthony says, "Listen, I think we got a really cool gig here." He says, "I says, what do you got?" He says, "Duran Duran." I'm like, "Really?" He says, "Yeah, they're doing this thank you album. It's a bunch of tributes to, other artists and that whole thing." And so the first song we did was 911 as a Joke, the Public Enemy song. Is that who did it, I think? And their version was, it sounded like a GB band playing Public Enemy. Drums, guitar, solos. I'm like, and so what happened was it just tried to assimilate something of that. Steve Ferroni was playing drums. It was a great drum track, and we mixed the song, and we both worked on it. He added a few little loop sorts of things, and we got free time at Sound Techniques, was a studio in Boston, did it on SSL.
Yeah.
And we didn't send it to them. At that time, the only way to get things instantly was using EdNet, that you paid exorbitant amounts of money per hour to send it, what was essentially a companded version of it overseas or wherever you wanted to, or FedEx. It just always took 2 days. So I said, we're going to hold off on it. And I was sitting in front of the library near where I lived, listening to it in my car, and I'm like, this isn't why we were hired. This isn't what Warren said to Anthony. And I called him up. I says, "Hey," I says, "you hear this mix?" He says, "Yeah." I says, "It's really boring, isn't it?" He says, "Yeah." I says, "Listen, let's go in the studio one more day and let's just fuck it up." He's like, "Yeah, that's a good idea." So we went in there, we disassembled the song, and we got rid of most of the drums. Anthony came up with a bunch of really cool shit, and we started putting it together. It was really, really out there. Sent it to them, and that was it. We had the gig. If we had sent them the Steve Ferroni, like GB band playing Public Enemy thing, we wouldn't have got the job. It would have been like, all right. And then we went there and we mixed White Lines immediately. And they were in London like a week later. And then we mixed like 7 songs for that record. Every one of them was a reconstruction because they had recorded it while they were on tour, all these different studios. You open it up, you got like 48 tracks with no track sheets. Like 7 tracks of vocals. I call up Warren and go, who's technically the producer. I says, "Hey," I says, "which one of these vocals is the right vocal?" He says, "There's no track sheet." I says, "No." He says, "Pick one. You're a producer." So I come back. I said to Anthony, he says, "What did he say?" He said, "Pick one." So I picked one. It was, it was an arduous project. It really was. But they were just fun to have around. And the thing was, at that time, I think Nick, Simon, Warren would come by. John Taylor was living in LA at the time. But I swore they were never in the studio at the same time. Well, Nick and Warren would come together because they were working on this TV Mania project at the time that we worked on later. And then, Simon would come different days. But I can't say I ever saw them there at the same time. And Simon was just always a blast to have around because he's like a lot of truly like famous creative people I've met. They just happen to have found their niche doing what they do. Even if they never became stars, they would be the same person. Fame didn't change them. It's just who they are, And he was sitting there, and we were all sitting around. It was the last night in London. I think this was when we were doing the Medazzaland album. And he came by the studio. It was the night after the Brit Awards, the one where one of the Spice Girls' boobs fell out. That's
Jerry.
Yeah. They were accepting a some sort of lifetime achievement award because Simon came to the studio before that. He comes in there like all like white leather suit, pants, red patent leather shoes, like he was all like maxed out on something. He's kind of crazy to begin with. And he was super crazy because remember Warren was there, and Warren's who always talks like a secret agent. I don't fuck with that guy. This guy's all maxed out on something. Well, the next day he came to the studio and hung out with us. It was like, we were going home at like, 6:00 that morning. So he's like, "Hey," he says, did you have any kebab while you were here? And I'm like, "No." He says, "We've got to have proper bob." So we just walk out of the studio. It was Metropolis. It's in Chiswick.
Yeah.
Where the old power generating station was. We were there forever. And we're walking down the street, and I looked at Anthony. I said, let me ask you something. I says, we were working over in Hirsch's garage. Do you think we'd ever be walking down the street in London with Simon Le Bon? He's like, no, actually, no. And we came back and we sat there, and Simon just told us one story after another. There were only things that you heard about on, MTV News at the time, when the time they sunk the yacht, when they didn't have insurance on it, and he's looking, he says, this building, he says, I was going to buy it, but I decided to put it all up my nose. And we just sat around there all for like hours, passing a bottle of warm Stoli around, drinking it, and listening to him tell stories. Still one of my favorite memories in the business. Yeah. The crazy thing is, we didn't take pictures. Now we take pictures of everything, not a single picture. I've got 1 or 2 pictures of Anthony and I in London working at Metropolis, but that was it. And spent a lot of time. I mean, on Midazolam, we were there for 8 weeks mixing.
Yeah.
Well, re-recording, mixing. That's what Duran is. If you never noticed, they take on the complexion of whoever's producing them. Simon's always going to be Simon, but sonically, listen to the records and you hear. Listen to the records Nile Rodgers did. You can hear how deep that influence is.
It's just absolutely incredible. Again, it's like another legend as well. But like you said, the fact that he shared so many incredible stories as well with you is just absolutely amazing. And I remember as a kid, again, growing up on Duran Duran's music, and always my mum playing it in the house, and it was just such a it was just really inspiring. And it's so great to see how many bands that they inspired as well with just their great What I loved about Duran Duran is they were just great at pop music, and I love the albums that you worked on with Duran Duran. But again, one of my favorite songs of all time that they've done, Ordinary World, that song me,
that's a David Richards mix. It's great.
It's beautiful.
It's a great track. Yeah.
Absolutely stunning. But it's just something about it that's like all the hairs on the back of your neck and your arms that just go up, and you're in a different place.
It's interesting because it feels haphazard the way everything goes together, but it comes together like that. You think of Warren's like this jazz rock fusion guy. How does he do this? But when you work with him, we recorded stuff and it's like, this guy is way out somewhere that taxis and spaceships don't go, because they process music differently than the rest of us. He hears something else, and a funny story is when we were doing the mix of I think it was 911 as a joke, and he said, well, play it for me over the phone. So we're holding the phone up, he's in London, we're in Boston, and we were there mixing White Lines. He lived in Hammersmith. It was down the street. And he's like, are you going to come by? No, man, play it over the phone. So Anthony walks in the control room, and I'm like this. He's like, what are you doing? I said, Warren told me to play it for him. He says, he's not coming here? I said, no, he told me to play it from over the phone. And the crazy part is, I come back, he says, hey, can you hold the phone still? So I'm like, oh, fuck. I go, I grab a mic stand, I duct tape the phone to the mic stand, and I play it for him. And then Warren goes like this, listen, the vocal and the second verse, he says, could you bring it down half a dB? I'm just staring off in distance, like, what the hell is he talking about? He's listening to it on a phone. And so I did. He's like, oh yeah, that's perfect. He didn't want to come over initially, he told us later, because they had such trouble mixing the record. We were like the 5th mixers to work on the record. Yeah. And he said he was afraid he was going to ruin the vibe. He was going to put some bad juju in it. And he just wanted to get the record done. And finally it was working.
Absolutely amazing. Thanks so much. Very quick, Bob, I've got to share this with you. Okay. Nuno says, hybrid shit animal wins the internet today. I love that.
Hey, that's an original one. I want to say hi to Kevin Dietz, too. He went by. Kevin works at Metalworks in Mississauga. That's the band Triumph studio. And also, absolute cherry 8068 there. Great room, great console. He's a great guy.
Absolutely amazing. Thanks so much, Bob. So please let us know your favorite coffee, Erica asks.
Well, currently it's Pete's Major Dickinson's blend.
Nice.
I like Illy espresso blend when I can afford it, but it's darned expensive, and I drink too much coffee. In the old days of the record business, maybe.
Absolutely incredible. And Erica asks as well, says, plus let us know a funny, maybe we can go to this in a minute, but let us know a funny extreme story we've never heard before. Plus let us know your favorite extreme album that you've worked on as well.
Oof, that one's a tough one. Extreme 3 would be my favorite extreme album. You know, it was such a transitional part of all of our lives, and it was the absolute fruition of everything, every dream that they had shared and that we had shared when we were working and stuff. I mean, it doesn't get any better than you got a record that just sold 4 million units and they just sign you to a new deal. You do whatever you want, you know, and they did whatever they wanted, you know, and, you know, listening to that record, you'd understand why they're called extreme. There's just so many angles to the band. It's so much and so many different songs, you know. You know, and it was, you know, the entire thing from there to when we were in London, you know, we were at the Freddie Mercury benefit like the day before we went to Abbey Road, and then we were home the next day, and I just remember sitting there back in my apartment, and I said to Nuno, I said, "Did this just happen?" He's like, "Yeah, man, fantasy weekend in London." Let me think of an extreme story. You're going to take me a minute. I have to find something that isn't profane. You know, you know, those guys, I spent so much time with them. Seriously, it was like 10 years. And they were my main client.
Yeah.
So, you know, we just spent an immense amount of time together. Here's one that's studio related that is kind of funny. We were working at New River Studios, which is where we did Extreme 3. And they had a Mitsubishi 32-track digital, you know. And we recorded the drums and analog, and the rest of the instruments were digital. And then what happened was when we were mixing was when we would take the analog back out. So it didn't have any degradation from running back and forth over anything. We were going to be, so we were recording I'm Ever Gonna Change. And, you know, Nuno and I would take turns sitting and recording. Sometimes he'd do it, sometimes I'd do it. You know, we were always sitting together because, again, myself, Nuno, and Carl Napper, who was my assistant back then, best assistant ever, there's always the three of us everywhere, you know. So Nuno's sitting there, and there's if you're familiar with the song, it's right towards the very end of the song, and he holds this note out, and the Mitsubishi had this auto record function that was a little buggy. You had to respect the way it operated. You had to let it run the entire routine of record and then come out of record. And it would do a post roll when it came out of record. You should never touch it while it's doing that. If you do, then you have to do the exact same thing again. And it's basically reprogramming it. But, you know, we forget shit. And Nuno's operating the machine, so this is his fault. So at least I didn't erase it. And it's like Gary went for this note at the end. He's singing it like this. It sounded like Roger Daltrey. And we kept hearing it. And every time it went by, we just look at each other and smile. Because, you know, we still have that boyish excitement about it, you know? When you get outside of, we got to do a record and sell records and all this stuff, it's still like, here's a bunch of kids with a dream you shared, you know? Here we are, we're doing it. And every time I came by, Nuno look at me and smile. And I go, wow, I shake my head. And, you know, but we're trying to punch this one thing in over and over and over again. And Nuno made the mistake of hitting stop because he got impatient. Then he hit play. And then when he went to hit record and run that routine of the auto punch, it didn't. As soon as he hit auto punch, it erased that vocal. And so he's like, what? I said, what? And we looked over and I'm like, oh my God, it's gone. It's gone? I said, it's gone. Nuno's like, he whacks the remote for the machine with his fist. When he hits it, all the buttons come flying off, all the numerical keypads.
Oh, no.
They're all over the floor. Now, the assistant from the studio isn't there. It's just myself, Carl, and Nuno. Nuno's like, Now when we go to hit play, the machine won't play. So it wasn't merely just a matter, I'm going to put the keypad buttons back on. I can handle that, but it won't go into play. Now we've got to go get somebody. I said, Carl, wait. He says, I'll go get Larry. He says, don't get Larry. So the tech, Larry Janis, that's the guy we were speaking about. You know, that's how I met Jack the Bear, was through Larry, and that's how I met you, was through Jack. So
cool.
So I put the numbers back on real quick, And what happens is Jim Thomas, the studio assistant, comes in and goes, got a problem? He was always happy, you know. The problem is, fucking thing isn't working. He says, well, what happened? I says, I don't know. Just the play button's not working. He's like, the play button's not working. He says, yeah. Nothing happened. I says, no. I says, nothing happened. He says, why are the numbers on backwards on the keypad?
Oh, amazing. That's so funny. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Oh, thanks so much for sharing that, Bob. That was awesome.
I'll give you one other one too, because it is a little funnier, but
yeah, go for it.
We were, you know, when we were doing Extreme 3, Scott Bernstein, who was one of the managers in the band, he recorded every second of that session. He still has those tapes. And we were recording the bridge section. It's the sort of on Rise and Shine, which is like vanity, vanity. It's all like, it's basic bar chords. Nuno, brilliant virtuoso guitar player. He just has difficulty with bar chords. So he's out there playing it. He can't get it tuned. And he's like, he's getting frustrated. You know, you know, as with all albums, when you're doing stuff, you start off with the best of intention at 10 o'clock in the morning, but like a month and a half in, you're starting at 3 every afternoon and working till 5 in the morning. It's brutal. I'm not a night person. I picked the worst career for not being a night person. And so Nuno's out there, he's like, he's playing the guitar that had been lost for a while that he played More Than Words on. He found it in his basement, like behind a heating unit, you know. That was the guitar. We recorded it. It's the awful Washburns. I can't stand the way that thing sounds. So it's like,
wow.
It's like, so he has the guitar and he's playing it. He's like, he gets his guitar tech, Mike Hagan. He goes, Mike, can you tune the guitar, man? I can't get it. So Mike comes in and tunes it. And with Mike, those guitars, they were like children to him. They were his babies. Took very good care of them. To watch him, he would take the entire tremolo system apart every time he cleaned it, and you know, lubricate everything and tension everything. Like so, Nuno keeps going. We've been there for 2 hours with 8 bars, and it was truly out of tune. So Nuno's like this, and he's getting more and more impatient. He just gets up, he takes the car, and he goes wham, 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 and he whips the thing up in the air, and guitars don't just come apart that easily, by the way. It's not like you see in the movies. You end up with half the guitar stuck to the strings. You can kind of injure yourself if you're not careful. So he slams it down to the floor. He rocks out of the control room, whips the door open. He goes, Mike, what? Tune the fucking guitar. So Mike walks in. He's like, he looks in the control room and says, it's not going so good, huh? I says, tune the guitar. So we walked over. He walked into the room. He goes, and he just drops to his knees and he looks up. He says, I would have tuned it. True story.
Oh man! But again, it's like would bands do that now? Would musicians do that? I don't know. It's like you don't hear of many artists doing like crazy shit like that in the studios these days. It's
yes. Carlos, the Grammys were for Basilos Caroluna. 2 of them for that, and the other one for Black Guayaba's No Hay Espacio.
Oh, amazing! So cool. Thanks for that, Bob. That's brilliant. So funny. That's brilliant. Tell us about Collective Soul as well. So let's have a chat about those guys.
That job came about in an interesting way. There was an assistant who worked on Extreme 4. His name was Chris Carroll. And he worked, like, we were here doing Extreme 4 for like 5 months. I'm not exaggerating. Think about that. 6 days a week. That's 5 months. We spent so much time playing Madden football and Sega golf in that lounge. We were in the big room at Criteria, the big giant Studio A on the Neve. Life was good. I mean, it was a really difficult time musically because everything was changing, bands like Extreme. I mean, honestly, Extreme is not a hair metal band. Right? You can't label them. They're a rock band in that classic vein that Zeppelin and Queen are rock bands.
Yeah.
But, you got hair, you get pigeonholed. And but we said, we're going to do what we're going to do. And it was conceived as a stripped down record. For Extreme fans, it's not a favorite. You got to be a hardcore fan to like that record because no layered guitars. There's usually only one guitar in a lot of the songs. no layered backgrounds. Those thick, like, quadruple, octo track vocals aren't there. And I love the record because it's so organic, and some of my favorite recording because there ain't no drum samples. There was no EQ. There was no anything. I mixed the drums on the jukebox section of the Neve, compressed them through a 162, DVX 162, and recorded that to 2 tracks. And most of the record is those 3 channels, the kick and those 2 channels. And also my one of my crowning achievements recording double-headed kick drum with no mic inside. That was it. How I did that is I'll save it, but it was, and I've always loved that record. Well, I got off track because I think you asked my favorite record. It was Extreme 3, though. It was. Those are good times.
Absolutely amazing.
Didn't take many pictures then either.
No, it's like, did you take pictures now? It's like,
now we take pictures of everything. I got pictures in the last Extreme album, Nuno holding up a cupcake and a Coke, and he's saying breakfast. I wonder why he's crashed on the couch by 11:30 in the morning. The sugar rush is over.
Absolutely brilliant. Tell us, thanks so much for that, Bob. Tell us as well about some of the Latin.
You asked about collective. I'm sorry.
So what happens,
I told you I get in rabbit trails. Chris Carroll had, Collective Soul was a criteria. They'd been there for 3 months. Atlantic was getting antsy. They wanted to hear, what are you doing there? And Ed Roland had liked Schizophonic, which was Nuno's solo album. It's crazy because I didn't think anybody even heard that record. And it's a very cool disc, And Chris said, Bob St. John's living in town. I was living here then. It's like, really? So he had his manager get a hold of my manager. I went in and mixed a song for them. And that's how our relationship began. I think the first song I mixed was Heavy. It was a good time. And actually, they were recording in Studio A when I was mixing, I think, up in Studio C at the same time.
Absolutely amazing. Can you remember what gear that you were using at that point as well with the band?
Then, most of my mixing at that time, prior to Pro Tools, was SSLs. 4000s, 9000s, 6000s. I liked the way they sounded. I did not like them as tracking consoles. They don't kick it for me for a tracking console. When I've got a track on an SSL, most of the time I'll use outboard preamps. It's not that they suck; they're just not the flavor that I like. But the nice thing about an SSL is it distorts in a really delicious way, and even their plugins behave exactly like the console. If you push it, you get that same. It's kind of warm. It's not fuzzy. Like a Neve V series, you don't want to distort that. It's not pleasant. But that was, and you get used to that sound of it. And of course, when you're doing mixes and you're mixing on just that piece of equipment, you just get used to doing that all the time, and you get used to the automation. You got used to pretty much every cantankerous thing it could be, But to me, that was the classic workhorse. And if I could have a console for mixing in my house, I'd have a little short frame SSL.
Nice.
So
you choose the SSL over a Neve, would you?
I mixed some of Schizophonic on this Neve. We were at 301 Studios in Sydney. Oddly enough, that ended up at the studio Longview Farm in Massachusetts. I loved that console. That was also in really good shape. I never remember. Longview Farm's gone. That was one of my favorite studios ever. It's a residential studio. They had 2 rooms, one with that 8068 and another with a Trident A range in it. I couldn't get any better than that. And you lived there. It was far away from civilization. You had to like that. We did, Anthony and I did, Lay Lady Lay there, one of the Duran tracks. It was not released. They ended up changing the mix of it.
Wow.
Yeah, I think Tim Palmer mixed it. I think so. I'm pretty sure. What happened was he just put together all the elements, not the way that they should have gone together. They were never meant to be together. There was like sequence drums, and then we had this very cool Mozambique, all like everything played live, percussion and everything else. And we locked ourselves in Longview Farm. We were there for about 3 days doing tracking. Anyhow, we had mixed Nuno's record, part of it on that Neve, and in Sydney, and I just didn't like mixing on the Neve. I didn't feel like I had enough flexibility. I'd gotten used to the SSL for mixing. I love tracking on it, but it was awkward mixing on it. They had a GML automation on it as well. And no, I would prefer an SSL for mixing. I think the Neve is the ultimate tracking board, though.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
so maybe hybrid the two consoles together, just have like them next to each other. Maybe I don't know.
Exactly. That would be
That'd
cool.
be amazing.
My electric bill would be higher than my rent.
Yeah,
That's what I tell people. It's don't romanticize analog till you get your electric bill.
absolutely. But it's hard not to romanticize analog, though, I suppose, when you look at, like you said, Sound City as well, which is incredible film. But that Neve console, is it the Studio 606 at Dave Grohl's studio? What a console, though. It's like, it's crazy, you know. But it must. The thing is, though, what amazes me is the fact now, though, that, like you said, it's like you can now make amazing mixes on a laptop. It's
Right.
just absolutely mind-blowing technology. You can do that
it really is. I embrace digital completely, and I love that you can do that. It's like, you know, digital's unforgiving. Analog is a lot more forgiving, and you know, if you suck, you're not going to do a great job in digital. You know, and so the workflow being faster, I like. You know, Phil here just wanted to know about the kick drum sounds. I'm going to touch on it real quick.
Cool, do it.
And this is you know, this is tech talk. So if this stuff makes you catatonic, I apologize. You know, I put 2 mics on the kick. That was Paul's DW kit, and we had this idea. We were going like for the Zeppelin sort of thing. So I said, well, why don't I, you know, mic both sides? So I put a mic on the front, like a 47, and I put a 421 on the beater side. But the problem is, the beater is like, you know, this close to the actual strainer of the snare drum. So what I had to do is, you could say, well, you'll gate it, but you can't gate a kick. It makes a clicky sound every time the gate opens. So what I did was I actually brought up the kick drum on 2 faders, and then I ran a trigger into one of the faders. And the trigger would cause the gate to open anytime the snare played. Hence, when the snare played, one of them was out of phase, and when the snare played, as soon as it played, it would shut off the output of the kicked mic. This worked for like 90% of the time. As long as you didn't play kick and snare together, which was really rare, this worked. So what it is I actually essentially use the snare drum to gate the bleed on the kick drum. It worked. Yeah, you can't, and it's transparent in the mix.
That's amazing. Thanks so much.
Right.
No, that's amazing. Thanks so much, Bob. Yeah. That's absolutely brilliant insight. Latin bands, yeah. So with some of the Latin bands, so you've worked with over the last few years. So tell us more about the Latin movement. Latin sounds.
What had happened was when I first came here, I was a bit of a novelty because I was a gringo engineer anyhow from Boston. And I had started this woman who managed Crescent Moon Studios, which is where we had mixed Extreme 4 at. Extreme 4 was done in a very weird way that you don't ever do records, where we did one song at a time.
Yeah.
So we spend like 5 days recording, and then we go to Crescent Moon. The mixes were simple because literally the songs were like 10 tracks. So we'd go to Crescent Moon and mix, and we kept Criteria locked out while we were at Crescent Moon mixing. These are the good old days of the record business. And a woman there was Susan Zukowski, and she had heard I was moving here, and she says, I can get you work. So she had hooked me up with some Latin producers here, and I started working with them.
Yeah.
There's this band I worked with that was actually like the ex Menudo guys called El Reencuentro. And through them, I met this guy named Ignacio Pena. And he was just some kid playing piano. He was hanging out with the guys in the band. We were mixing a live show. And he just enjoyed hanging out in the session. And then he ends up getting a record deal in BMG Latin. And when he wanted to mix the record, he said to his producer, I want Bob St. John to mix my record. It was a very important record because, first of all, I love the record. It's called El Mundo al Revés, which means the world in reverse. Also, it put me completely on the map in Puerto Rico as a rock engineer, you know.
Wow.
And I can trace so many of the projects I work with back to Ignacio's record.
Yeah.
And here's a crazy thing. I've never been to Puerto Rico.
Really?
Not kidding. Not kidding.
Wow.
Riley, hi. Riley Cornell was an assistant at Crescent Moon at New River also. He worked on Extreme 3 with us. Yes.
Brilliant. Hi, Riley.
I lost my train of thought. Oh, it's gone.
The Latin bands that you're working on and you were...
Yes. So what happened was, you know, uh, I met La Secta All Star, very big band in Puerto Rico, through Ignacio, and through another band, Si Senor. I met these guys in Black Guayaba. I remember they came up to me and they said, you know, the singer Gustavo says to me, he says, "This is our CD. I'm in a band. Would you mix our record, mix our songs?" I'm like, "Yeah, let me see." He gives me a CD. There's no vocals on it. That's always scary. You never know what you're in for when you don't hear vocals. And but we did. The guy's a great singer. It's a great band. And I mixed 3 or 4 songs for them. And then they came back like about 6 months later. Says, "Well, we have 10 songs now." They'd gotten so good at recording. They were recording bands in Puerto Rico for money so they could pay me to do the mixes. Did their first album. First album came out. You know, they got a record deal, was nominated for a Grammy, and their second album won a Grammy. And still, it's one of my prouder achievements in my career because they came out of no place and started with absolutely nothing, you know, and they put their faith in me. And it's a great record. No Hay Espacio is the disc. And I've worked with a bunch of bands in Colombia as well. There's a producer there that I work with, Daniel Cadena. You know, there's some great recordings coming from Colombia. That's some of the best recordings I've heard, you know. I'm particular about stuff, and it's not because I'm full of myself. I happen to like the recordings I do myself because I know they're done right. And there's a handful of people doing great recordings. There's a handful of people now doing really great recordings at home where, you know, and I always give the same advice. Don't do anything. Just because you got some fancy boutique EQ, you don't have to use it. What do you know about that EQ? Why don't you just record a nice, pure sound, and then we can deal with it later? This is actually the way people have been doing records since, like, you know, the 20s. You just capture the best sound you can. They didn't have any EQs or anything to work with. You as soon as you start twisting knobs, you actually limit your possibilities, you know?
Absolutely. We were talking with, I was interviewing Henning Pauly, YouTuber, last week, and he was saying, like you're saying, it's like in the 60s and the 70s, you know, there were seminal albums like from the Beatles and the Who and Zeppelin, you know, but there weren't particularly great recordings, as in the fact the sound quality wasn't great, but yet they were amazing songs. That was what he was saying. And the fact that, you know, but they still, you know, were amazing for their time, but yet, you know, how would they sound in a modern production, you know, with today's recording tools? I don't quite know. But what really interests me as well, though, Bob, is that with, for example, remote recording, do you do anything along the lines of remote recording with artists, as in go live on a video chat with them as well? Is that something that you've explored?
I haven't done that yet. I would. I mean, I learned how to record by dragging that 8-track around with me. I recorded everywhere. If I could find some place that had an acoustic space, I could. And it was so much fun because people would hear and they go, "How did you do this?" Because there was no Lexicon reverb. There was nothing you could afford then. You just had to find a space and figure out how to record in it. And to me, that was the challenge and the fun of it. You know, I record at home all the time now, but I'm used to that. And people say, "How do you record at home?" I said, you know, stop thinking it needs to sound like a studio, and then you're going to get a great recording, because your house is not a studio, you know, but it has acoustic environments in it that you can't get anywhere else. Studios now, too many studios are too dry for me. I want ambience to work with, you know. I can get dry anywhere, but like some sort of ambience that gives a character to the sound, that's always what I'm looking for.
Amazing. Thanks so much. I've started exploring as well with my mastering stuff with Session Wire, which you might have come across as well. Yes. And I was just there thinking, it's like how, you know, I know with Session Wire you can record bands and they can log onto your screen to see your mix or whatever you're recording as well. It's just so exciting now with technology. And I think maybe, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I think a lot more people
just started using audio movers. And I think it's the coolest thing ever. Because first of all, I was working with this client, Audrey Silvers, a jazz artist from New York. And, you know, she was going to come down here, and then they had a change in plans. And she says, "Hey, have you heard of audio movers?" And I had used it. Guitar player here, Alejandro Garcia, who's one of my favorite guitar players. He showed it to me. Of course, he lives just down the street. But, you know, sometimes it's just an effort to get in the car and drive. So he says, "Hey, let's use audio movers to do this." And I'm like, I was like, what is this? Because, you know, when you see stuff like that, your mind starts to go like, look at all the ways I can use this. So Audrey said, "Well, can we use that?" I says, "Yeah." Because normally people who don't do this every day, they can't sit here and know what they're hearing and how it translates in the environment that they're used to hearing music in.
Yeah.
And I said, this will work great. I says, you got the converter. She had everything set up in her house, the headphones she uses, the speaker she listens to all the music on, and it made the job go twice as fast than if she was sitting right here with me. And that works for me, because the thing is, now we have to deal with, in terms of making money, doing a quantity of work also. And that, computers allow us to do that. I'm working on 5 records at once, so you're always doing something for somebody. And if you don't lose your mind trying to keep it straight, it's all good.
Absolutely. I was going to say, juggling 5 albums at once, though, is just, that's incredible. That's so cool. But yeah, it's just wonderful. I think it's like you said as well, the fact that, like you said, you've used audio moves, but, and I started to explore session wire, but it's just, there's so many amazing things that we can do and rightly record. And the fact as well, I've heard somewhere along the line that you can actually let someone else have control of your DAW as well.
Right.
So if you're with another engineer and they go, oh, I've got an idea, they can quickly whiz onto your computer and then tweak things, and you can collaborate.
It just brings the interactivity back to us that we've lost.
Yeah.
That, where you producer sat next to you, it's like, hey, let's get this a little here, where you can go like this, and boom, boom, like that. We think back to like the old days of analog and locking up 48 tracks of tape together. What a nightmare. I did it about a couple of years ago. I'm like, oh my God, we used to do this all the time. This is going to take forever, because you got to hit rewind. You got to wait for the machines to lock. By the time the machines are locked and you're listening to them lock, it's going,
yeah,
it's not charming. It's not funny. It's not cute. This would be like saying, yeah, I really enjoyed changing that diaper. It's not funny or cute. After a while, it's just a drag, and you're waiting for it to go by. And by the time the part you wanted to fix the automation is, you're sitting here like, huh? Well, oh, so then you hit rewind and you do it again and again and again. It's not charming. I like being able to have somebody interact and say, here, this is what I'm looking for. It's so much faster. And in the end, whether it makes a giant difference or not, for the artist, for the producer, it makes them feel like they got what they wanted. That's how you retain clients always, is, I've always taught, I remember I taught Carl that, I taught anybody who worked with me. I said, people need to walk out of this session, whether they are a famous rock band or some guy cutting a couple piano, vocal, and demos, feeling like they had fun. This is supposed to be a fun, creative environment. As an engineer, we're facilitators for them. We aren't the artist. We're supposed to make it easy for them to create. And then when you get to the deeper part of it, then they trust what you do, and they will only work with you. Many of my clients have worked with me for 20 and 30 years because they don't have to hold my hand all the time. And because they know if they got some insane idea that I think is awful, I'm going to try to put it through for them and try to actually get into it. Not just say, oh yeah, you want a distorted voice like a telephone for the whole song. Yeah, I was dying to hear that. But you do it and try to assimilate it into what works for you. That's what's important. People are supposed to be having fun here, I guess. That's what I heard.
Oh yeah, completely. That's the reason why we do it, surely. Thanks so much for that, Bob. It's brilliant.
I have to stop you for a second and say hi to Eric. Eric's in the band Streetlight Circus. I just finished mixing their record. Eric is one of these people who gave me one of these amazing recordings that he recorded in his living room. He's a drummer. And again, they had this massive ambience on it, but it wasn't like uncontrolled splashy. It was perfect. Yeah. And until they told me, I didn't know he recorded it in his house. It's good to see you, Eric.
Brilliant. Hi, Eric. Absolutely amazing. We've got Ken saying, Bob, what's the history of the failure arrow? Tell me what that's in connection to. That's gone whoosh over my head. I don't know.
That's Ken Hauptman. Ken worked with us, with myself, Anthony Paul Cervoni. We had a production company together. Yeah. And the the failure arrow was used when a session wasn't going well. That's what it was about. And back then we used to do songs for people by the song. Yeah. So we would get, I can't even remember what things cost, but you'd get X amount of dollars per song. And then out of that, we'd get our money and pay the studio money. The studio is $300 a day. I remember that, Yeah. And we did a lot of songs with Ken. And hi, Ken. Honestly, Ken, I don't really know the history of the failure arrow.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Bob. So we were talking about digital as well, and recording bands remotely, and your transition from analog to digital as well. So tell us. I know that you work on Pro Tools. That's your DAW of choice, as you said. Tell us about some of the third-party plugins that you enjoy using from time to time. What do you particularly enjoy using on your mixes at the minute?
When I started using Pro Tools, was the first album I mixed in Pro Tools was Ignacio's album I mentioned. That's where I met one of my best friends, Iker Gastaminsip, one of my favorite engineers and very good friend. And, he was totally committed to Pro Tools. And I'm like, I don't know. But you know what? It was a gig. And within about like 2 or 3 days, I was in love with it. The workflow, the plugins. And back then, we're talking like 1999.
Yeah.
There wasn't as much available, and the plugins were super expensive. Everything was a TDM plugin. You had to have a big, expensive system to just do sessions. And I just fell in love with the workflow. And I managed to use, I had 2 pieces of gear I wanted to use on that record, it was a Joe Meek compressor, the original Joe Meek stereo compressor. And I think I used an outboard reverb and what I loved at the time, a DBX 120 XDS. I used to use that all the time on kick stuff. And I fell in love with it completely and committed to it completely. So much so now when somebody says we're going in a studio, I'm kind of bummed. I mean, we all need to work all the time, so I'm going to do it. But the studio structure, once you work for yourself and you don't have a session coming up before you or after you, and you're like, I'm tired, I'm going to stop for the day. You can't do that, studio. You're paying 12 hours, and it's like $1,500, $1,800. I mean, and that puts a certain weight on things. So you're not going to be taking breaks. You're not going to sit down and watch the news for an hour. You're not going to get up and leave and go shopping for groceries. You are stuck there for 12 hours or 14 or 16, and God forbid you got to finish it. And you've got to work through from like right up till 10 o'clock the next morning. I don't enjoy that. I'm not 23 anymore. I've done it, but not anymore. In terms of plugins, when I first started using Pro Tools back then, the Focusrite, like the D series plugins, those were the shit. I'm like, wow, how cool are these? I didn't even think to compare them to the Genuine article. Bob Pascarella says, I'm not wearing pants now, Bob, if it makes you feel better. I knew I wasn't going to stand up. I feel more. Now we can compare stuff. Back then, I didn't have any Red Series to compare to. I love the Red Series. Yeah. But now when I use the actual hardware, I'm underwhelmed by it because I've gotten used to the plugin. Those are good plugins, and I still use them to this day. So the thing is, from there, it just kept getting better. And I remember when I got the first Universal Audio plugins, which was the LA2 and the 1176. Remember Bomb Factory came out at the same time, similar things. And the Bomb Factory stuff at that time was like, I was in love with that. I had the Bomb Factory Fairchild plugin. Nothing really sounds like a Fairchild, but they get it close. If you use the Genuine article, but on the other side of that, the Genuine article ain't all that great either. I remember when we were mastering Extreme 4, I was talking to Bob Ludwig about this. And he was telling me when he was working at Masterdisc, he says, those damn things. He said, I remember the day we retired it. We all celebrated. He says, now it's a classic piece of gear. I says, I find it cantankerous. We used one in London at Metropolis. We had rented it for 2 months. The people at the company hiring it out were mad at us. They needed it. And we had it there for 2 months straight. It's so freaking expensive. And that thing, it runs on 120 volts. So they had to have a power transformer with it. And every time you walked up to it, you had to have one hand behind your back, because if you didn't, you'd get a shock.
No way.
Then you'd be working and you'd just be sitting and waiting, and you'd hear like. Anthony said, "What's that?" I says, "I know what that is." We kept a pair of big rubber welder's gloves next to it, and I'd go back and I'd reach in and go like this to all the tubes to get it working. I like the Fairchild plugins. UA's Fairchild plugin is great. The thing is, this stuff is all what you make it, and I try to stress this to people is you need to explore them one at a time. Now I feel bad for you guys because there's almost just too many options.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah.
Pops, it was the one with the big arse knobs. So it's just too many options at this point.
Yeah.
So, and I could see where it's like being a kid with too many toys. You get frustrated. So I've always taken my time. When I buy plugins, it's one at a time. You know, I'm using Pro Tools 10 still. I'm gonna upgrade in the fall. So I can't use any of the Plugin Alliance stuff because the installers don't work on this OS.
Really?
Really? Yeah. And you know, yeah, I think I don't have any Plugin Alliance stuff. I mean, I've got the Brainworks stuff and that stuff, but those were all TDMs and natives going way back. You know, so the thing is, they kept getting better, and that's when, you know, when UAD started with their PCI card with their Shark processors, and I started getting the 160s, and I had 160s, and I had the SSL, and I had the SSL, and now I could compare them in absolute real world everyday use. You know, listen, I don't want to think that my $3,000 piece of, you know, shit hot outboard gear is going to be outdone by, you know, some number crunching computer, but I could not tell the difference between the SSL stereo compressor and the hardware compressor. And and that to me signaled that you gotta get rid of these things. And I did at a good time, because it was still worth what I paid for it. Yeah. And I'm not saying, listen, if the hardware turns you on, awesome, knock yourself out. Don't get paid enough money to keep 9 pages of recall notes. You know, the days of people paying $3,000 or $4,000 a mix, those are long gone. And here it's like, and people want revisions. There's some weeks I spend 10 hours a day doing revisions, you know, for projects I'm working on. And it's like an assembly line after a while. You know, the same thing happened when they came out with the DBX 160. When the UAD came out with it, I had 2 160s. I'm like, well, I don't need these anymore. And, you know, sold those too. The things that I still don't feel they get, and I don't think they're ever going to get, is equipment that has a lot of tubes and a lot of inductors in it. Yeah. I.e. the Fairchild, the LA tube. A lot of that stuff. I think there's a certain metaphysical thing that happens that a computer can't do, that code can't do. They're really fucking close. But put it next to it, do a blind test, because I'm always doing blind tests of everything, because I don't trust myself. And I'll tell you a funny story in 1 second, but is you got to do a blind test, flip back and forth, and then see which one you land on. Make a note of it. Don't identify either one. Just make a note with a number, which one you liked. And then if you can't make up your mind, then you know you don't need this piece of hardware. But if you reach for it, if your ears gravitate towards it all the time, then you know, well, this is what's working for me. What works for me wouldn't work for you. You know, my friend Eker, you know, he was like, you know, hardcore digital, and he'd come over my place and he'd go, Bobby Loco, what's with this stuff? It goes, I says, I happen to like it. He says, and then he's a UAD guy now. Like, oh, this stuff is amazing. Like, yeah, you know, because they got rid of the noises. That's what they did. I kind of miss the noises, to be honest. When I was working at Normandy, I was really young. We had an 87. Normandy had the most cherry collection of microphones I had ever laid my hands on. You know, all Stephen Paul modified mics, Klaus Hein modified mics. They had I think it's a C12A, looks like a 414, but it's got a little tube in it. Yeah. That's one of the most amazing mics I heard in my life. Really? Every now and then you'll see them pop up on eBay. I missed out on a couple of them because there's some guy selling 2 of them about 7 or 8 years ago for like $6 or $7 grand. You know, I mean, I don't like to buy old stuff because they're ticking time bombs, but that was a cherry mic. And well, we had hooked up one of these 87s. Things sounded great, but I said, I don't know. Let's hear the other 87. Let's hear the 67. So we had the 87, 67. And I said to the assistant, put these on 2 faders, but don't tell me which one is which, okay? He said, oh, okay. So he put them on the 2 faders. And I swore, yeah, that's the 6. Oh, that's it, man. That's the 67. That's it. Yeah. Yeah. So I says, yep. I says, let's go with the 67. You can take the 87 down. So he took the 87 and he moved it across the room. Guy steps up to sing. He sounds like he's across the room. I said, I thought that was the 67. He says, oh, and I looked, he had patched the 87 to both mic pre's. Now, you could say one mic pre sounded better than the other, or that I was just led to believe I was hearing something I thought I was hearing. I still had to instruct the singer to get in front of each mic. You got to do it blind, eyes shut, flip back and forth, make a note. It's the only way to do it. And that's how I usually get rid of gear. I still have the lexicons because nothing actually sounds quite like them.
Oh, lexicons are great. Yeah. Absolutely amazing.
So I consider that UAD to be the smartest guys in the room, and right next to them is Brainworks. All of the stuff that Dirk puts out is amazing. It's amazing. You know, and I'm looking forward to upgrading just so I can run some of them and be able to A/B them. You know, the thing is, you can hear some, you know, different ports of them and different platforms. You know, I think that, you know, the SSL sounds better as a UAD plugin than SSL's version of it. You know. And listen, I love the SSL version of the plugin. I used that near exclusively for about 4 or 5 years because it reminded me of the console. I mean, the thing is that the people who haven't laid their hands on the actual gear need to realize that there's something you're missing. You need to understand how it would behave if you crank the threshold all the way up and you had it, you know, pinned, you know, 20 dB gain reduction the whole time. It's just not the right way to use it. Well, not the way I would use it. There's no right or wrong way. But the thing is, if you use it like that and say, this doesn't sound like analog, it's because we would never use it like that. That's all, you know. But most of the stuff I use in mixes every day is the UAD stuff.
Awesome.
And the SSL.
Thanks so much for that. It's really interesting. Just a couple of things I'm thinking of with plugins. Thanks, Bob. Leapwing was one that has stood out for me over the last few months. I remember Bob Katz, when I interviewed him a few months ago, he mentioned about Leapwing, and what really interested me about that company was the fact that the plugins aren't necessarily emulations of what we've been used to with hardware. It's forward thinking, and I've really enjoyed using their stuff. But also, as I talk about Dirk as well, Plugin Alliance, I know the hot topic at the minute with Plugin Alliance is that they've recently launched some AI stuff for mastering as well, which is obviously I'm there as a mastering engineer going, oh no, you know, panicking. You know,
my friend Adam Matza, who does a lot of mastering for me, we talk about this, and he's really peeved about it. And I'm like, hey, you know, I've tried them out. They're not bad. It's not going to match a human interaction and human ears, but I'm telling you, it's pretty good. And if it's all you've got and you can't afford anything else, it is directly taking work away from guys like you. You know, it's never going to take work away from guys like Ted Jensen because, you know, there's people who have that money for that. But there's some people who might have said, hey, we'll give you $100 for a mastering, saying, oh, but I've got this plugin and it seems loud enough. I mean, I've tried several of them and I have very discerning ears. And my initial response, and that's what it is. These things are like, you know, when you go to a music store and you try out a new keyboard, it's got all these wacko effects on it. You're like, hey, this is really cool. Point of sale. So is that stuff. The second I heard it, I'm like, oh, that's not bad at all. So I said, I'm going to listen to this for a little while and incorporate it in my workflow because I do mastering also on occasion. And I said, I'm going to incorporate this into my workflow. And I let it ride for a while. And then I got up, I went in the kitchen, I got a coffee, I came back. So here I had my mastering with, you know, the usual plugins I would use and the Brainworks, you know, with just a few knobs and, you know, and the Brainworks was a pinch louder, but the attacks sounded strange. The peaks sounded strange. Things that I could not address. But again, you and I are technical people. We're going to address it. Some people, they don't know. They just like it to be brighter and louder. And you know, it's hard. It's hard because, you know, we're always up against clients who are like, can you make it this loud? It's like freaking -4 lufs. Really? And, you know, all I hear when I hear that is distortion and clipping. But hey, if it turns you on, it's still the loudness wars bother me to this day because I feel an entire generation of music has been ruined with this. It's okay for it to be dynamic.
Well, absolutely. But isn't that what, thanks so much for that, Bob, but isn't that what Spotify and all the other, I know a lot of people go, Spotify, and that's another huge topic really, and how obviously it's, you know, taking a lot of money away from artists in the music industry and budgets. But with -14 lufs as well, I know that a lot of my clients say to me, I'm not really that bothered. And they're going, yeah, but that's the Spotify standard. So it's up to you if you want to go there or not. But, you know, I don't know about you, but I love dynamics in mastering as well. you know, and it's if like you said, if something's at -6, I'm there going, no, it's just like, you know, the kick sounds brilliant, but where's the rest of the track? You know,
I mean, I've had you know, because you know I've got, you know, a project I worked on recently that I'm producing, this band Shad, who's from here. Ted Jensen mastered the stuff, and it sounds amazing. It's really loud, but it's not distorted. It's not clipped. I don't know how Ted does it, because Ted's a genius. And here's the thing is, you know, I would never say, hey, how'd you get that loud? It's pinch loud for me, but it's not distorted. And that stuff, I've looked at it here. It's at like -5, 5.8. Pretty loud.
That
it's
is
rock
really
music,
loud.
distorted guitar, loud music. And the low end hits you in the chest. I'm like, all right, that I don't mind. But the thing is, but the thing you got to say is, why? Why are we doing this? Yes, I wanted a little louder. I wanted more punch and oomph in the low end. You know, he's done a bunch of records for me. The Black Guayaba album, the most recent one we did, I can't remember the name of right now. Did a great job. And again, it's super loud, and that same deep punch in the low end. Some guys have a knack for doing that. You know, I prefer the dynamics. You know, the 2 Extreme albums that Bob Ludwig did, which was Extreme 3 and 4. They're loud and they're dynamic, you know. And those guys, Ted Jensen, and then George Marino, who's gone now, Doug Sachs, Bob Ludwig, David. Come on, he used to work at A&O. His name just failed me. He did the Duran album for me. Did a great job.
Cool.
Wow. Sorry, David. You know, they can make that stuff loud without decimating it. Because the thing is, as an engineer, that's not what I want to hear. If I wanted it clipped, I would have given it to the mastering guy clipped. You know, I have a pet peeve about saturation. It makes me crazy. I use it on individual tracks for a purpose, but I've had mastering guys send me stuff back here and like, hey man, I put this through my thermionic culture vulture. What do you think? I said, sounds distorted. And they're like so disappointed. like I got to be honest.
It's just what I love about mastering is I love doing linear work, so it's really serving the mix. And I think it was Mike Exton when I interviewed him. Excuse my French, but he literally just said to me, he says what he loves about his favorite mastering engineers, get the fuck out the way, is the fact that, you know, that we serve the mix, we serve the producer, we serve the artist rather than getting all colorful, which sometimes, you know, as you said, sometimes it's needed or sometimes it's wanted, but I just love doing linear work. I love doing linear masters.
Bob Pasquarello. Bob, was David Collins I was thinking of mastering.
Cool. Yeah.
David's a great guy too. And Mike G was my old business partner in my first studio.
Brilliant.
I'm going to share a quick story because it's too funny.
Yeah, go for it.
You know, I'm phobic about smells. You know, for a guy who's got 7 cats, that's kind of crazy. My house doesn't smell.
7. Wow.
I'm surprised none of them have walked all over. Usually they're modifying mixes by now.
Amazing.
And you know, but you know, Mike and I took everybody seriously then because I was young and green. And Mike stopped at the gas station. He says, "Hey, Bob." He says, "What?" He says, "Just got to go in." He says, "What?" He says, "I got to get some gas." I says, "Yeah." He says, "Gas? Gas goes in my car." He says, "No, I got to get the gas for my coat." I says, "You need gas for your coat?" He says, "Yeah, it's a leather coat. It needs gas." And I said, "You're not getting back in my car with gas on your coat." That's a true story. There you go. Bob Pasquarello he had asked it, you know, the experience with vintage gear. And that's what I was getting at before. It's nice when you actually know how it feels. The stuff is super close. It's super close. I think it's actually close enough now, you know, for most people listening in earbuds, that a lot of that stuff, hardware, is to make us happy, you know, as creatives. You know, look, Nuno can play, you know, he could play, you know, $100 guitar. He's going to sound like Nuno no matter what he plays.
Yeah.
You know? And I think this applies to anything with equipment as well. You know, and a piece of shit equipment in the hands of a master will still sound like it's in the hands of a master. You know?
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. Does it as well with? I mean, I've had a chat with a few engineers about this, but the fact that everyone now listens to music just with this, that's all they do, and they listen through this. And it's like, and we've got these amazing speakers, but do you think it's an absolute shame that people aren't sitting down with their hi-fis as much as what they once were?
It's a, you know, was I think it was Prince's Love Sexy CD that has no indexes. And it's like, wow, what an arrogant stunt that was, right? No, it makes you listen to the whole thing. Records, and I'm going to call them records because I'm just an old dude, but records, they're meant to be experienced like a movie. A movie, to me, it's the grandest art there is. It combines photography, artwork, writing, acting, music, engineering, sound, effects. Those are meant to be experienced at once. If you want to get the emotional impact that the director is trying to give you, you have to sit through the whole thing. Well, why not with a record? You know, would you listen to Pink Floyd The Wall and go, you know what? I just like Comfortably Numb, and go right to that. And what do you experience? The song Comfortably Numb. But when you listen to it in the context of the record, especially after listening to it a few times, you're like, oh man, that's deep. Maybe I need to be stoned. But, you know, and, you know, that's the thing, is music's meant to be experienced. The problem is now artists, they drop one song, two songs. Here comes another one. And by the time you get the whole album, it's like, oh yeah, I heard all that. And what cohesive concept actually ties it together? You know, maybe it's just a bunch of songs and they don't have to be cohesive. But the thing is, it's meant to be experienced. If you grew up listening to albums like we did, you didn't get up and change the song. You just didn't do that because it was an effort and you wanted to experience it. I remember vividly being like a teenager. No, I was 20 something by then. I think I was listening to the Yes album. The one I can't remember the name on it, the one with Honor of a Lonely Heart on it. And I had a pair of headphones on. I was just in my bedroom, my eyes closed. You just experience this depth of soundstage and this density. You know, that's what I look for when I'm mixing. You know, I don't listen on headphones except when I'm almost done because it's too much of a treat otherwise. And I need to hear it in free air here and in my car before I can sit down, put the headphones on and go, oh, wow, now I get it. You know, where you get that sense of depth, you know. This is, you know, problem is a lot of music has become fast food oriented, you know. You know, because, you know, my daughter is like, she's going to be 22 in January, but my experience of most modern pop music was through her. I'm like, oh my God, this stuff all sounds the same. It's because the same three guys wrote everything and the same guys were mixing it. And it doesn't make it bad, but it makes it kind of unimaginative. That'd be the right word. Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting you say that as well, that about speakers and the air in the room, but people, again, they're missing out because, as you said, they're putting their headphones on constantly, their earbuds, and that's the way that predominantly people consume music. But as well, I think my concern as well, being a mastering engineer, and I suppose it's the same with mixing as well, but is the fact that people, again, when they're mixing their own music, maybe at home, or they're just starting out, which is great, using near-field monitors, they're not actually feeling the kick, they're not feeling the subs, they're missing out on all that as well. But I suppose Bob Katz said that bass sub is expensive. You know, it's expensive to get the room properly treated. Define it. It is. It is. You know, it's still the most satisfying thing to hear. I mean, there isn't anybody I know who's recording at home. I said, get a sub. Why do I need a sub? I says, it'll change your life. Oh, what kind of subs? Get any sub. It doesn't matter. Get it, plug it in, listen to some music, set it up, find the volume you like for it. It says, you'll be so happy. You know, I've got subs on everything. There's a sub in here. There's a sub on all my home entertainment systems, a sub in my car. There's a sub on my computer speakers. You know, I want to hear what's down there, you know. You listen to the very peculiar mix of Saudade de Rock that Nuno did. And I told him when he was mixing, he says, why don't you get a sub in here? He's using the B&W 803s. I'm like, you can't mix on those. Oh, you know, no. He says, all right. He says, you need a sub in here. No, man, it's okay. And it's not okay. Because, you know, he mixed it himself. He actually mastered himself. Bernie Grumman's credited with it, but I'm fairly certain Nuno did it. Bernie wouldn't put out a record that soft. And because Nuno's against compression and limiting and EQ and reverb.
Fair enough.
and when you listen to it, you try to turn it up, it distorts in your headphones. Because I recorded those tracks, double-headed kick drum through a Neve. that, and because I did some test mixes for the band. That's a long story because I'm not going to get into it. But and when I was doing the test mixes, I know when I recorded that kick, NRG is a great room. That's a great console, and that low frequency energy in the kick that goes down to 20 hertz, no problem. Well, if you can't hear 20 hertz, you're in deep doo-doo. It's a double-headed kick drum. It vibrates at 20 hertz. When you listen to it in the headphones, you try to turn it up, it's like you can hear it distort because there's 20 hertz energy. A mastering engineer would have cut that party off at 40. Yeah. But and when I heard it here, I'm like, that's a glorious sound, but that has no place in this. That has a place of you watching a band in a live room, where there's a big row of subs out in front, and there you go. Let it cave in your chest. But we have to make music for humans here.
Yeah.
Where it's not blowing up. And I always tell people, just get a sub. Be happy. Be happy.
Absolutely amazing. Thanks so much for that, Bob. Well, what speakers are you using as well when you're doing your work at the moment?
I have been using Genelec 10, those over there, the 1092s. I always forget the numbers of them. They're the ones that were very, very popular, early 2000s. I used ProAx before that, which I loved, the Studio 100s. And after that, I had some Questeds, which I loved also, that I had a big Hafler sub with that I loved also. And what happened was, the producer I was working with, Luis Ochoa, who worked with Shakira and all these other Colombian acts, he's like, he says, yeah, if we mix over there, can you get some Genelecs? And everybody in town had Genelecs. So I'm like, okay. So I bought the Genelecs in a sub. And I've been using those for 20 years.
Amazing.
I would like to get a new set of near midfields, but the problem is that with the explosion of people recording at home, and people who have more money than me, the price of everything is way out of range. I'm not spending 15 grand for a set of midfield speakers. It just doesn't make sense to me. Somebody can do that. Somebody, who can afford that sort of thing. But these, to me, at this point, they're kind of tired. They were old when I got them. I got them on eBay. I get most of my stuff on eBay anyhow. And what I miss on them, and it's what they don't seem to really have anymore, is the really sharp center image that was once there. I could recap them and whatever. I don't have that ambition at this point. Hopefully next year I get something new. I don't know what I'm going to get. The problem again now is like people selling stuff aren't around. It used to be you call up here as Mike Harris and you get, bring me over some speakers, but people don't have as much stuff. There's a lot of boutique stuff that's made to order,
It's crazy, isn't it? I'm really enjoying my I use PMC Result 6s, and those things, to me, I'm just there. I looked at different monitors with all the different controls on the back, and that's just got a volume control. That's it. It's just so simple, so quick. And I think Bob was just saying about apparently I'm a living example of that big cam headphones. The back in vogue. LCDXs, Odyssey.
All right, you know what? All right. Okay. Complete coiled.
Well, let's just hang with our headphones, Bob. I'm just doing this so there's no feedback,
I knew. I figured.
Amazing. So cool. Phil's asking us, I always love the extreme sounds, and in my opinion, you are the best engineer ever. Thank you for being awesome.
Phil, that's so sweet. The nice thing about the internet is I realized that, people heard these records. When you do a lot of music, you don't realize stuff out in the world and what, people think. And honestly, before there was Facebook, I'd read comments on Amazon where people would say really kind stuff about stuff that I did. And that's, I'm like, hey, that's really cool. Or, sometimes you're impressed that people heard it, like, well, you sold 1 million of it. Somebody had to hear it somewhere, but, it doesn't always sink in. I mean, to this day, I'm still surprised when I hear something on the radio that I worked on. It's sometimes you don't recognize it and it sounds familiar. And on the best days, you go, that sounds pretty good. I wonder what that is. And then you go, oh, I did it. And on bad days, it's like, that sounds like ass. Oh yeah, I did that too. So it's a double-edged sword, actually.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Bob. Well, I was going to ask you as well, before you go, so maybe to have a chat about your workflow as well. So with your DAWs, so when you're actually setting up a mix, do you have a template set up that you tweak, or do you
I
build
don't.
it from scratch?
I don't
or?
have the template where I'm using the same template all the time. And generally, and it's it's not out of laziness. It's just for being expedient. Is I'll go with, if I'm working on something, what have I worked on recently that sounds a little like this? So I can at least start with all the same sends and returns and basic things. I mean, basic flow for me is, I got a master fader with 3 things I'll use on it. Usually the all plugins, the Chandler. I used to be smart. You didn't know me when I was smart, but I was smart once. What's the Chandler EQ? What's it called? Curve bender. Okay.
Yeah.
The Chandler curve bender.
Yeah. Great EQ.
The SSL compressor and the all UAD, the ATR plugin, the Ampex, which I also, last time we were at Criteria, we put all of these things up against each other, where we had mixed on the analog console. We went through the analog machine, bounced it at 88.2. And, the ATR is pretty easy to identify all the time. But if you put the plugin on versus the actual original copied version from the ATR, you won't be able to discern them. There's no way to tell them apart. Wow. And that to me was a real shock. I always think that this is cool, but I'm buying it maybe because I want to buy it. It's like going in the internet and looking up information to find things to support your theory. It really works. So those would be my basic master fader plugins. The SSL is not doing more than like 2 or 3 dB of compression. If anything, the ratio, the attack is never below 30. I set the release fast. It's usually 4-1. Lately, I've been using the 2254, which is, I was dying for somebody to emulate that. I did try the one that they had. Who did the Lindell did one that was like similar. I didn't like it as much. Plus, it was a big CPU hog in my computer. So I've been using the 2254 sometimes. Sometimes I use the Vertigo, also really cool plugin from UAD. That's a basic master fader. And then everything else is, drums are a subgroup for parallel compression, although, it depends on my mood. What I've got is the entire kit minus the toms and kick come through that subgroup. The kick goes to its own subgroup, so I can affect that by itself. And the toms go to their own subgroup where I can compress them, do whatever I want to them. And they work exclusive of the drums, but the entire kit is on one VCA master, so I can adjust them all relative to each other. I think the VCA masters are one of the coolest things in Pro Tools. That, a lot of people don't know about it or don't use it. I grew up with SSLs. You grew up with those 8 faders in the middle of the console. You lived by them because, the big console, you want to do something in channel 73, you have to get up and walk to it. Yeah. That's another reason I like digital. I've got 24 channels. I can keep flipping through them all night. The SSL, last time I did a mix, Iker and I were there mixing the song together with this artist he was working with, who was convinced that mixing it in analog studios, this guy had a huge budget. And Iker mixed the song. He had Tom Lord Alge mix the song and analog. And I'm dead serious. These sessions were like 180, 190 tracks. They're super involved. And then Iker said, well, hey, he says, you want to help me mix a track? I'm like, sure. This is what you do. He says, we got to go to Criteria and mix one of these songs. So we went there. And, the two of us, we look like a couple of old men, unfortunately. And, nothing aggravates me more than when you walk in someplace and the assistant treats you like this is some sort of weekend hobby, like, like we're playing Confederate soldiers on a battlefield. Mm-hmm. I straightened that out quickly because I don't have the patience for that. And you should look up who's at your session before they come to your session. That's all I'm going to say. And so we're sitting at the 9000 series, and I'm staring, and I'm like, he looked at me and says, "What?" I says, "I don't remember." What? And I said, "Is there a manual for this thing?" I don't remember anything. So the two of us are sitting there. I mean, not to mention, that's a huge console. It's a 96 input. It's in Studio A now. And that's like, I spent like 5 months in Studio A when the Neve was in there, but that was a long time ago. And so they do a great job taking care of things, but something that large, the hip hop guys come in there and they use 3 faders. Mm-hmm. And like, so Iker's got stuff. I don't know how he's got subgroup stuff and Pro Tools. We got it on faders, and we used all 96 faders, and there was stuff in Pro Tools, and and he's like, a lot of things are like, the buttons, because the thing doesn't get used like it should. I swear it atrophies. But we're mixing, and I'm like, he's like, that bongo. I says, where's the bongo? It took 2 of us to operate the damn console. I got to walk down. I'm like, is this it here? So I'm like moving the fader. He says, yeah, I think that's it. And so I got to walk back because this thing here, I can sit here in the middle all the time, So that workflow is gone. That's a good thing. The other things in my mix, basically, nothing else is grouped. The vocals I do on their own fader set, also on a master. And what I'll do is I'll process them with maybe some extra compression or the Studer plugin. So you get that a little bit of the roll off you can get at 15 IPS. And the rest of it, I have a lot of the same sends and return set, but I change them for each song. And what is a throwback to analog? I know in a lot of analog mixes when I was really busy, and at first I thought, wow, that's really lazy. I remember Warren Cucurillo telling me they're doing some mixes, a different 2 albums after we worked with them with Chris Lord-Alge, and they wanted to make a change. So Warren said to him, he says, hey, so you're gonna get that recall up? He says, yeah, I'll be in a couple hours. He says, it's already up. He says, what do you mean it's already up? Everything's normalized. Come on in. They don't ever touch the knobs. They don't ever touch the settings on the units. And I used to say, wow, that's really lazy. I was all indignant until I had a bunch of gear and I never touched the knobs either. If I want less threshold, I just turn the trim down a little bit. That's all.
That's mad. Absolutely correct. Do you use it? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Bob.
No, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to ask. Thanks so much for that. I was just going to ask you as well with mixing. So do you have a remote that you use as well? So like with a
I use a D command. I've been using the D command now. This one's been here 10 years. I used the Pro Control before that. I'm in love with the D command.
Mm-hmm.
I abuse this thing. I mean, I found a cheap source for the faders, but I really beat up on it. This is a somewhat dusty atmosphere because of the cats and the house and everything else. So it has to stay covered up at night, and the faders get a little sticky. And I'm sure I've replaced the faders on these at least 2 or 3 times. It's the only design flaw. I don't know why they didn't use some sort of sealed fader that wouldn't collect, because even the skin flakes from under your hands get on the track, and it's bad. I wanted to say, Erica, thank you for their kind words. Thank you. And Carlos, I love your son's stuff. This guy, both of his sons have done projects with me as well as him. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Amazing. So it goes from like one generation to another. That's great.
Yes.
Brilliant. Love that. That's so good. You know what? I've got to ask you this question as well, though, Bob. I've got 2 cats myself as well, though. How many times do your cats interrupt you mid-session? When they're trying to get some food, or does that happen quite frequently?
There's a black cat. He's sitting on the table right now because there's so much gear set up in this general area. There's wires and camera shit, and they don't want to get near it. And well, there's one there on the couch. You can't see him back there, but he's the one who likes to walk across the console. So when I come down here in the morning, I'll see a session open. I'm like, did you do that? And cats have their own life. So Bob Pascarella has cats too. It's every session there. And Dexter, who's the patriarch, who's a big Maine Coon, when he wants to go out, he'll come in here. He will give me the evil eye, and if I ignore him, he'll walk over to the panel furthest away and just start clawing it. And I'll look at him and I'll say, "What do you want?" He runs right to the door, and he's the only one that goes in and out. I'm like, hey, go out already. Or if I ignore him long enough, he'll just step all over this, and then he'll lay right here in the middle. No problem. No. And I've definitely had them modify mixes. That's their thing. They're my entertainment here.
Absolutely, mine too. So cool. Thanks so much, Bob. Thank you so much for your time today as well. So it's been absolutely fantastic exploring your past history and the amazing stories and all the technical stuff that we've gone through as well today. But tell us, but before you go, have you got one last story to leave us with?
All right, name an artist. Although Extreme, I have the most amount of stories with. This one has been told before. I don't think anybody here has heard this one, but
cool.
When Nuno's a pretty anal guy, and I've known him for a really long time, And, when we did that Steven Tyler thing, he called me up and said, you got to come in. You got to come in and, engineer this for me. This is going to be a good time. They did a remake of Brown Sugar.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, sure. And I know, he doesn't really need me there, but I'm flattered because he needed me there because he needed somebody he could trust in that position so he could produce and do his job, and it was really great working. The place is Fame Studio is just legendary. It smells like history when you walk in there,
Yeah.
And it was just, it's overwhelming almost, and Nuno said to me, he says, one thing, he said, on this project, whatever the singer says is right. I said, oh, okay. Because that's Tyler. And it's like, Tyler comes in and says, hey, can you put a mic on the bottom of the snare? I fucking hate mics on the bottom of the snare. But, because I had a side mic. That's what I used, a mic on the side. So I put a mic on the bottom. I just ran the mic cable off into the other room, didn't plug it in.
No,
it's not the story he's going to tell you. Here's the story. No. When we were doing Schizophonic in Australia, we mixed it at 301 Studios in Sydney. Beautiful place right downtown. And Nuno at that point had become very hands-on. He wanted to, do stuff in the mixes. And, the thing is, I'm not going to get in the way of that. He would do micro movements on the fader. I didn't have the heart to tell him the tolerance is half a dB, but whatever. And he was used to flying faders. Anybody can use flying faders. GML requires an operator or a knowledge of, computer ease to use it. But the assistant was operating the computer, and I was sitting there next to him. I think Anthony was there with us also, because Anthony did a lot of programming, co-writing on the record. Yeah. And I was so tired. I was supposed to be there like a week, and we're on day 22. And it's becoming summer in Australia, and it's becoming winter here. It's like late October.
Yeah.
Or fall. What happened was he got this notion that the console was changing his mixes. And, I don't have time for delusional people. And if he wanted to think he was changing his mixes, I said, I don't know. And he said, yeah, look, see, it's moving. And he's looking at the fader. And I'm like, of course it's moving. It's a fader. No, it's not going up to 0 every time. I said, can you hear it? Yes, I can hear it. I said, you cannot hear that. He said, I hear it. So I've got a call. It was like 2 a.m. in Sydney. And I go in to the engineering room. He's the only person there that late is the engineer tech guy. Mm-hmm. And I walk in, the guy's like this. Like, excuse me, could you come on over here? And I need you to just humor my client. And he's like, huh. I says, can you check the calibration and the GML? And he says, yeah. So I said to Nuno, and Anthony says, you guys go somewhere else. I says, okay. Now, I've left a piece out. What predated that, and I'm sorry, I'm screwing the story up, but let me continue. This guy,
no, go for it. Let's go.
Guy comes in and he looks at the console and he puts it in calibration mode. And none of the faders seem to stay still, which means it's just not calibrated. But I don't think it's the end of the world one way or the other, because whatever Nuno was talking about, I couldn't hear. And I said, he looked, he says, that's interesting. He says, well, probably needs to be calibrated. Might need a new digitizer board. I'm like, oh, really? He says, yeah. I said, when was the last time it was calibrated? He says, when we installed it. I said, when did you install it? He says, I don't know, 10 years ago. So just as he says 10 years ago, Nuno walks in and says, what was 10 years ago? I'm like, oh. I said, nothing, man. No, what? I says, no, it's fine. It's fine. I says, he's just going to get this calibrated and we'll come back tomorrow, okay? Oh, all right. So we come in the next day. Yeah. We can't just go to mixing. Now we need to make sure that the fader is going to 0. So now there's the 2 of them. And Anthony and him are looking at it. And I'm like, I'm so over this at this point. I mean, I am seriously over this. It's like, they're staring at it. They're running the mix and they keep hitting play. Like, they're leaning over the console. They got their head down, staring at it. And they're like, did you see that? Yeah, I saw that. Did you see that? Did you see that? Hey, Bob, come here. Did you see this? And what I saw was 2 guys whose asses I wanted to kick on the spot. I said, well, what's the matter? He said, that fader's not going the same thing. I said, let's put it on a meter instead. So, you know, the Neve has a little meter. You can just make it do anything, just patch into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I, hit play, 0, 0, 0. And then one time it went just above 0. I was like, look at that. Look at that. And I went to the meter, and it went back to 0. I says, you guys need a rest. You guys seriously need a rest. And they're like, what? I says, there's not a problem here. So then Nuno goes home. Anthony and I go back to the hotel. And it's like waiting for him to come pick us up. Go to the session. I just wanted to go back to Boston. I didn't want to be there at this point. It was making me crazy. So I call over the house. Nuno was married to Susie DeMarchi from Baby Animals. And she was like 8 months pregnant at the time. That's part of why we were there, Yeah. I said, Susie. She says, oh, Bob, how are you? She says, what? She says, Nuno was supposed to be here noon. It's like 3 o'clock. I mean, is everything okay? Oh, it's quite wrong. He was up all night throwing up, saying something about the faders. Like, he said, what? We didn't work for 2 days. And when we came in, he did the exact same thing, staring at the faders. I'm like, oh my God. I said, we gotta leave. We gotta, So I called Carl, who was working, he was in engineering at the Hit Factory at this point. I said, can you guys get us a room with flying faders? She says, I don't know. Let me check. She says, oh yeah, we got a room flying faders. So we got to get on a plane and fly to New York. So we're going from Australia, which is like paradise, to Manhattan, which is hell. And it's winter. I don't have a coat. I don't have any American money. I don't have anything. What I do have is 30 reels of half-inch tape that I just humped from Australia because Mr. Crazy has to have vocal up 0.2 dB, down second verse 0.5 dB. And I'm like, I drag those reels all over this country, by the way. And we get to the Hit Factory. We walk in and we get to the room, and it was a room with an 80 series console, like an 8028, and with GML automation on it. So I look at Carl, I said, what's this? I said, this is GML. I said, we had the flying faders. Nuno's going to have a nutty if he doesn't see flying faders here. He's like, yeah. So he called up Danielle, who ran the building on 54th and Broadway, and says, Danielle, yeah, says, we needed a Neve with flying faders. Yeah, that's GML flying faders. I says, there's no such thing as GML flying faders. Nuno walks in the studio. He's like, oh, what's this? And I can see his hair getting oily and stringy, and he's starting to play with it. I'm like, oh my God, I got to get out of here. This is just like Groundhog Day for the studio. That's what it was. I was Bill Murray, and I was going to drive that damn gopher off the side of out into the river.
Oh man, there should be a film about this. There really should. That's mad. Bob St. John, thank you so much, man. It's just been
my pleasure.
Absolute blast.
Thank you to everybody who chimed in. I really appreciate it. You make me feel loved.
Oh, it's been brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And everyone watching on YouTube, feel free to come hang with us on a daily basis on our community on Facebook, which is 2,800 members strong. So we've got everyone from beginners to Grammy-winning pros like Bob. And so if you go over to facebook.com/groups/produce, mix, fix, and conquer. And also, if you're on Facebook, feel free to like and subscribe on our community on YouTube, which is youtube.com/produce, mix, fix, and conquer. But Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you. Take care, my friend.
You too, sir. I'll hang with you once we end the live, if that's cool.
Yes.
Thanks for joining, gang. Take care.